Well, I had friends when I was in high school in preferred activities like horseback riding, electronics, or model rockets. There's a tendency sometimes to just go on and on and on talking about the same thing. And this is where someone had to tell me, you're going to tell that story twice, and that's all that people are going to want to hear it. They're going to get bored with it after hearing it more than twice. Give them, say, hey, you know, you've talked too much about that robot. Let's talk about something else. Well, let's give some examples of things that are not perfect. Okay, if a photographer's working for the National Geographic, that would be at the pinnacle of photography career. But if you go through the National Geographic, you're probably going to find some technical errors like flare in some of the pictures. But overall, it's such a great picture, even though it had flare, you still use the picture. Also, if he's a science kid, bring up the concept of absolute zero, where all atomic motion is stopped. You can never get there, you can only approach it. You know, get the concept across of work up to a certain standard. It doesn't have to be perfect, it's got to be up to a certain standard. Well, when I was a young kid, there were expectations for doing things that other people want. It gets back to turn taking. Yeah, I'd sit through church even though I thought it was boring. But that's something the other members of the family wanted to do. And there were expectations for me not to be disruptive. And most of the time I behaved. You know, and that's just one step beyond turn taking in board games. You've got to learn to get your turn. Sometimes you get to pick out the movie, and other times brother or sister may pick out the movie we go to. Well, one of my really important teachers was Mr. Carlock, my science teacher. And he had interesting projects for me to do. And I worked on all kinds of stuff with optical illusions. And that actually helped me in some of my cattle work, because it made me pay attention to what the animals were seeing. And then doing interesting science projects got me motivated to study, because now I had a reason for studying. Studying was a way to get to a goal of becoming a scientist. This is where a good teacher really turns a student around. Well, there's a lot of problems in the sensory system. Distorted input, sort of like pictures pixelating with a bad satellite dish, audio cutting in and out like a really bad cell phone. A lot of the sensory systems are not working normally. In my book, The Autistic Brain, I've got a whole big section in there on sensory issues. And there's an interesting new study that's come out called Environmental Enrichment is an Effective Treatment for Autism. Now, I want to make it very clear, this does not replace ABA or speech therapy. It is an adjunct. And what's done in this, and there's a paper you can get online called Environmental Enrichment's Effective Treatment for Autism. You stimulate two senses at the same time, like maybe you do an aromatherapy, a cinnamon, something like that, touch carpet. You always changing the pair of senses that you stimulate. And one of the senses is always one of the more primitive senses, smell, touch, or balance. So there's a lot of emphasis on 8 different aromatherapies, and the people were, children were evaluated baseline. Controls got ABA and speech therapy. Experimentals got this additional sensory therapy. And then after quite a few months, they evaluated them again. And the experimental group that had the treatment had significantly better behavior. This is a refereed scientific journal article. And it uses simple household things, very simple to do. Environmental enrichment is an effective treatment for autism. You can download it online. I'll tell you some things not to do. Don't say you went to sleep, because then the child might be afraid that you went to sleep. When I was very young, we were out for a walk and came across a very flat squirrel in the middle of the road that had been run over. And it was very clear that the squirrel could not be put back together again. And that made me learn not to run out in the street, because I wouldn't want to be like that squirrel. And there's no way the veterinarian could do surgery and put him back together again. I mean, basically, you know, death of a person, they are gone. They are gone. Well, Oliver Sacks is a very kindly kind of professor type of person, and I read an article he wrote in the New York Times just before he died about, going back doing the Jewish Sabbath. And at the end of the article, he was talking about, well, if A, then B, then C, which way of his life could have gone down different paths. And I started really weeping when I read that article, and I'm glad it went down the path that, where our paths crossed. I could barely print it out, I was so upset. No, fortunately, he was writing right up until the end. And he's overall really satisfied with his life. Well, after the article appeared in the New Yorker magazine, shortly after that, an agent appeared that suggested that I ought to write a book. And that's what brought the book Thinking in Pictures into being.
Hey, I'm Candace Cameron Bray.
Tom Bergeron.
You're watching Autism Live.
And you're watching Autism Live.
And you're watching Autism Live.
You're watching Autism Live.
So thank you for joining us. We're here with The Future is Bright, and we have a very special guest, Temple Grandin. Doctor, thank you for joining us. We're
It's
so
good
excited
to be here.
have you. Thank you. You just gave a great speech at the 46th annual conference here in Denver, Colorado, and we would love to take an opportunity to just ask you a couple of questions about a hot topic for you now that is employment.
Yep.
And helping people with autism become gainfully employed, and what we can do as they're growing up, through the high school years and through those younger years, maybe before they're old enough to get a real job, as you'd call it. What's your advice for parents out there and what they can do with their kids today to help them?
The problem with autism is, since they changed the guidelines for diagnosis in 2013, the spectrum has become extremely broad. At one end of the spectrum, you're going to have Silicon Valley programmers, really good artists, really talented people. And at the other end of the spectrum, you're going to have someone that's going to remain nonverbal with some very severe handicaps, and it's all got the same word. You see, if you diagnose a kid with dyslexia, you still have a fully verbal kid with normal intelligence, can't read. ADHD, you've got the hyperactivity attention problems. It's a much narrower spectrum if someone is ADHD or they're dyslexic. Autism now, you've got this huge quagmire of a spectrum. And the only time I can give a specific recommendation across the whole spectrum is that the kid's 2.5 or 3 with no speech. You must start early intervention, 20 hours a week of one-on-one teaching. There's various ABA and other methods that work, but you got to start now. I can give you a canned answer. Once a child gets older, they're kind of merging into 3 different groups.
What are the groups?
Well, you're going to have a kid that's going to remain nonverbal with very severe handicaps. And some of the ones that look very low functioning actually have a locked-in syndrome with normal intelligence inside.
Okay.
Then you have a moderate group where you've got some speech, but it isn't really normal speech. Reading might be, 4th grade level, sort of like that. And then you've got the high-end group where they often are really smart in one thing, like math or art or maybe verbal, and then they have a deficit in another thing. And the education system puts too much emphasis on the deficits, not enough emphasis in building up the area of strength. Mm-hmm. If you've got a 3rd grader that's good in math, let's give them harder math and let's introduce them to programming. Okay. Because that's something that could turn into a job. The programs that are hot right now are C++ and JavaScript, Ruby and Python. The courses are free online, but the kid's not going to get interested in that unless you introduce it.
And who should be doing that? How do you recognize that you've got a kid with, let's say, a great math capability or great
All
art
right,
capability?
so the kid, you should give the kid the 3rd grade math. He instantly learns it. Let's get the 4th grade book out. Okay. Let's get the 5th grade book out. Let's get the 6th grade book out. If he can do the college book in 3rd grade, fine, let him.
Okay.
He's probably going to need special ed.
So very early.
Oh yeah, don't make him do baby math. He's going to get bored, and I guarantee you he'll be a gigantic behavior problem when he's bored.
It sounds like you think there might be a little bit of a coddling issue where parents are concerned.
Oh, I think there's a big coddling issue on just learning things like greeting. I'm really appalled at meetings where, come to a meeting, here is a 12-year-old completely and fully verbal that does not know how to shake hands. He doesn't know how to greet. You see, the manners in the 50s were taught in a much more structured way.
Right.
And teachable moments were used. Like if I picked up my potatoes with my hand, and I'm not French fries, but mashed potatoes with my hand, Mother would say, use the fork. Okay. She didn't scream no. She'd say, use the fork. That's a teachable moment.
Healthy alternative.
And I was at a very fancy dinner one time at a college, and there was a 12-year-old kid there, fully verbal. and he started to eat the food with his hands. And I just said, this is a fancy dinner. You're not eating like that in front of me. You use the utensils. And he did.
So it's
I
just
just
calling him
gave the
out.
instruction. But you give the instruction. I didn't yell at him. You give the instruction. But there's a tendency to overprotect. I'm seeing too many fully verbal kids that don't know how to shop.
Sure.
They're not doing any chores in the home. Just basic things. Greeting people. When I was 8 years old, Mother had me party hostess at her parties. And I had to greet the guests and serve the snacks.
So it sounds like your mother had a lot of faith in your ability to just take those tasks that she was giving you and do them.
Well,
and
so
you're
you
saying,
got to stretch these kids.
Stretch
you see,
them,
the kids
okay.
getting labeled autistic, the babying them. And you know, if you have a little kid, you know, that's, you know, severe behaviors. I was severe behaviors when I was 3 years old.
Sure.
You know, of course the parents are going to be upset about that. But then you got another kind of kid, 10 years old, no friends, geeky and nerdy, gets a label, and not enough's being done to engage his area of strength and teach him basic skills. Because what makes me crazy is I go back and forth between different silos. I'll do a talk out at Silicon Valley. You can go to the big tech companies. It's Asperger's everywhere. Cube after cube full of them. Headphones clamped on, don't even look up at you. I can go to the meatpacking plants. There's a whole shop full of hippies there. And I know they're on the spectrum. They've been there for years. This is what makes me crazy when I go out into the cattle world or the tech world or even the academic world, and I find older people my age, maybe 10 years old, that are on the spectrum, but they're not diagnosed.
So it sounds like you're saying in today's society, less helicopter parenting.
That's right.
And more, you know, you must do this and reinforcing. These are the manners you need. This is how
Well,
we
you
act.
just treat them. You got to move them just outside the comfort zone. I just met a lady when I was down in Argentina. I said, well, I can only shop at this one supermarket, this one newsstand. I can't go to another store. You know what I did with her? We watched
Took
out
her
of that
somewhere.
meeting, and we went to a new newsstand.
So
and
you
I
walked
brought her up
through-
to it, and I said, buy that magazine there. She wrung her hands a little bit, and she bought it.
Okay.
You
so
know-
you made someone else walk through the proverbial
I did.
door. Good for
That's
you.
right. That's what I did. I did that last week.
And you're encouraging parents to do the same thing with their kids
And then
now.
we're going to be getting into looking at the job front.
Okay, now that's something you just gave a great speech about. And it sounds like that's this new hot topic for you about how kids in their maybe early teens, maybe before they're really able to get formal jobs, should be out doing maybe the paper route type equivalent.
Okay, we don't have paper routes anymore. In fact, I got asked
equivalent.
I got asked the other day what a paper route is.
You're kidding.
No, I'm not kidding. And
By an
I
adult?
said, well, you know, they used to have children deliver newspapers to people's
Sure.
houses, and that taught really valuable skills.
Okay.
Okay, now we don't have that today.
But
How
what's the
about
equivalent?
walking some dogs for the neighbors? You can do that in the city.
Okay.
You know, but not your own dogs, somebody else's dogs, and you got to go over that at 2 different apartments at 6 o'clock in the morning. Take those dogs out and walk them every day, even when the weather's nasty. Or maybe working in the farmer's market. Okay, we were just discussing New York City, where my mother lives. When I stay at the hotel in New York and I walk 6 blocks to my mother's apartment, I go by 5 or 6 street vendors. Okay, a kid that's like 12 or 13 years old, have them help out a street vendor. They've got to start learning work skills. If they're out in the suburbs, they could help out in the farmer's market.
Okay.
Let's start getting creative. Let's start off with church and synagogue jobs, things like that. Church ushers, setting up chairs for the church social. Yes, it's a job. Every Thursday night, you got to do those chairs.
So it's the accountability, being somewhere where someone's expecting you to help out and do a particular
Then
thing.
it's a defined task. You got
Okay.
100 chairs to put up,
Defined.
and you got 100 chairs you're going to have to put away after the event is over.
So defined and repetitive and something that they do.
Well, a lot
Not
of jobs
for
are
the
repetitive.
family.
Newspaper routes are repetitive. But let's go through my work history. These kids have got to learn work skills outside the home before they graduate my school. All right. When I was 13, mother just in the neighborhood found a little seamstress that did dressmaking out of her home. And she went in and told about me. I was kind of different,
Sure.
but I was really good at hand sewing. So the lady started having me hand sew the hems and take apart dresses. When I was 15, I was cleaning horse stalls.
Okay.
Then when I got a little bit older, I was making signs and selling them. And the first sign I ever made was for a beauty shop. First sign I ever made for a customer. I had made some other signs before that. But making things, and you have to learn how to make signs that other people want. And then even when I was getting my master's, I was making signs.
So
The carnival. And then
our
my
kids-
aunt's ranch. At my aunt's ranch, there was some work stuff. I had to take guests out on trail rides, and I had to do
Okay.
some, she had guests there. I had to wait
So
on
you were
tables there, too.
accountable. You were given
Yeah.
various tasks and you were accountable. It sounds like that you're endorsing that we have our kids go out there when they're younger and do these, smaller jobs for people in the neighborhood or small business owners and learn those skills before they get to
Okay,
a
now
job-related
some states you
age.
can work in safe retail at 14.
Okay.
Okay, a lot of other states it's 16. Well, let's say you got a friend 2 blocks away, like a little tax accounting office.
Sure.
They can put the kid to work in there.
Perfect.
Cash economy.
Something.
They've got to learn work skills. And just look at the things they're maybe it's a little coffee stand that's in the neighborhood, and the kid, when he's 12, can go help out with that. And he's expected there at certain hours every week. It's a job.
Okay. And so that's the importance of it all, is just
They
to
have
get
got
them out
to
there.
learn how to work. And when I was 14, I got kicked out of school for fighting and throwing a book. Went to a very expensive boarding school. Spent 3 years of that time running up a horse barn and cleaning horse stalls. And what Mr. Patey, the headmaster, realized, I was learning job skills. That was super important. And then when I finally got interested in science and studying, I kind of did a year of high school in a year.
Okay.
But I had been working in the horse barn. I had learned that the responsibility every afternoon. You got to clean every stall, put them in and out, feed them.
So it's responsibility. Have our
That's
parents
right.
allow their kids to get out there and just not be afraid to do it before
They
they
got
get.
to get out.
Okay.
And the Project Search research has shown very clearly that working in a real job a whole year before they graduate from high school is very, very important for keeping employment after they graduate.
Okay, so along those same lines, now you've got a group of kids in today's society who have gotten out there and, let's say, worked at these little carts or local small businesses informally while they're younger, and they get older and they're able to get into the workforce. They need to get there. You got to get to your job. So you have to be able to drive if you can, if you're capable of driving. Talk to us about your stance on driving.
Well, driving was essential for me. I would have never been able to go into the cattle industry without driving. There's a scene in the movie where I get kicked out of Scottsdale Feed Yard. I was driving.
It was
If
beautiful.
I hadn't have been driving, I wouldn't have gone to Scottsdale Feed Yard to get kicked out of it.
Yep.
And so how did I learn to drive?
How?
On my aunt's ranch. We were 3 miles to go up to the mailbox and 3 miles back. And she started having me drive up to the mailbox on a dirt road. Well, over the whole summer, that was 6 miles a day, 6 days a week, I put 200 miles on that truck driving just on this dirt road.
Just to pick up the mail.
Just to pick up the mail. That's what we had to do. That's the way it was on the ranch. The mailbox was 3 miles away.
Okay.
So that was 200 miles of driving. That's a tank of gas. And I hadn't been near any serious traffic at that point.
Okay.
I think what you need to be doing is burning up a tank of gas in a totally safe place. Country dirt roads, giant big deserted parking lots, or open dry flat fields. Because there are some multitasking issues, and what the kid needs to do is he's got to learn how to operate that car before we go near any traffic. And the problem with driver's ed is they put them into traffic too fast. So I want to burn up this tank of gas in a totally safe place, then you do the driver's ed.
Okay.
So they fully learn how to steer, brake, stop. You can practice parking, practice all kinds of stuff, because this deals with the problems with executive function and multitasking. See, when you learn a motor skill like driving, you first of all have to think about how to steer, how to brake, and how to use the gas. Now, as you practice it, you no longer have to think about it. It just goes in your motor cortex.
Sure.
Well, before we go near any traffic, I want operation of the car migrated into the
secondary.
motor cortex of the brain.
So once that's second nature, and a kid goes out there and is learning how to drive on, let's say, this deserted road
Yeah,
or this
that's
open
right.
parking lot, and they've got steering down, and you want to maybe throw some things into the mix before they ever go into driver's ed, like it's raining, there's windshield wipers, and you need to look at your turn signal, and oh, by the way, you're about to park, those types of
Well,
things.
then you start teaching them how to use the turn signals.
Teach them everything.
You just teach them everything, and then even after I got a car, I went to Franklin Pierce College, but that was out in the country. There was some traffic, but it was really mild traffic. So I was another year on easy roads before I did any really serious traffic. Also, like downtown Denver, I just absolutely hate coming here. I actually avoid the rush hour, but you see the airport route, I know exactly where the lanes are, where I have to get over.
It's a more comfortable route.
The airport's totally comfortable.
Okay.
You know, so like going to the airport's easy. And see, all my agricultural jobs were out in the country. So,
Sure.
But even on Denver traffic, okay, I would learn a certain route. There's some really bad exits where you can get forced off. Well, then I got to learn where I got to get over when I'd learn the route. But it's just going to take longer. So I'm recommending a tank of gas in a totally safe place before we do any driver's ed, a year on easy roads before we do downtown traffic or crowded freeways.
Just a period of acclimation, it sounds
That's right.
like. Okay.
It's going to take longer.
For multitasking skills in general, whether it's
Well,
driving
multitasking is the problem. You see, and the way to avoid the multitasking is there's no multitasking if the operation of the car is migrated out of frontal cortex back to the motor cortex, so you don't have to think about driving the car.
So you want that extra time.
That's right, and then turn signals, well, you can practice that even on my aunt's ranch, where we would go up to the mailbox, there was one turn to the mailbox where I could practice a turn signal.
Okay. Okay, so that's driving.
That's right.
Now they can get to the job. They've learned how to drive. They've had their practice at manners at a young age and doing some of these informal jobs. Do you have specific advice for what we can tell adults with autism who feel like they've got the right skills to get out into the workforce?
Let's short circuit the interview process.
Okay.
Because we were just talking about this at the tech conference I was just at across the street with Specialist Cistern, that company, tech company that hires people on the autism spectrum. And they were talking about how they got to short circuit the interview process. And the way that I would do interviews is to simply show off my portfolio. I'd show pictures of things I designed, drawings. Okay, if it's a programmer, it needs to show a computer in there. Here's some C++ that code and it does this, and I got some JavaScript and it does this, and you just show off your portfolio.
So maybe a different kind of interview
That's
process
right.
for people
That's
on
right.
the spectrum.
And then once they get on the job, the thing employers have to realize is you cannot be vague. There's a scene in the movie where my boss slammed down the deodorant and said, "You stink, use it." That happened.
Right.
They got to clean up themselves, and I did it. And that boss, I'm pretty sure, was on the spectrum.
But you
that
said
did
you
that.
appreciated that.
Now,
because
I
it
was very
direct.
angry at the time. I was very angry and upset at the time, but I wanted the job. I thank that boss now, and I thank Linda Carpenter and her other secretary friend that took me out to buy the clothes.
Okay. So are there things that you would recommend to employers that they can do to be more receptive to people with autism?
A lot of people on the spectrum are going to need a quiet place to work.
Okay.
You know, some of these restrooms have these horrible Dyson blade air hand dryers. Now, if my office cube was next to that, I wouldn't be able to work.
I wouldn't either.
I've got to get away from that. And quiet place to work. Also, clearly define the tasks. Okay. Even now, I mean, when I do consulting, I've worked on a big manuscript with 15 other people. And I just said, I need homework. Okay, tell me I'll write this part of the manuscript, and I'll do it in this format, get it done on this date.
Okay.
Then, when I read through all the rest of the manuscript, I found some technical errors. You know, some things there might be opinion. These were purely technical errors. Another person corrected them, no track changes, just sent it on in.
Okay.
Because you don't rub the other person's nose in their mistakes.
Well,
because I got in trouble for doing some of that.
That's good practice anyway.
Yeah.
That's just nice, social skills. So it sounds like then, to just recap it, for employers today to clearly define tasks for people on the spectrum who are coming into the workplace, that's a great way to be sensitive
All right,
to
let's say
helping them
it's
succeed.
programming. You don't just say develop new software. That's too vague.
Right.
They've got to write some
direct.
code that does. You don't tell them how to write the code. That's up to the ASPE to do that. But what is the outcome? Okay, that's to go on a certain platform, be a certain language, and it's got to achieve a certain outcome.
Great.
And there's some deadlines.
Great. And deadlines. Okay.
Well, when I worked for the magazine, the deadline was so many column inches by the 15th of each month. And I was to cover a wide variety of livestock topics.
Well, I think that's great advice for employers out there, because it's been a big question, and I know we're out of time. We have to wrap up, but it's been great to talk to you about just the employment issue in general. My advice to employers as an attorney would be, give them a quiet place. Give them the well-defined tasks.
There's one other issue I want to talk about, and that's the video game addictions. I'm seeing way too many kids where moms are coming to me and says, he's 21, I can't get him out of the basement, and he's 18, I can't get him out of the bedroom. We've got to limit the video game playing.
Well, I think all parents sort of feel that way. And
well, we've got to, because they're not having good outcomes.
The more you limit the video games, and the more you can do, like what you said, is to help socialize people. The more we spend one-on-one time, like you and I have, talking to each other face to face, the more we all benefit by better social skills.
I'm not suggesting banning video games, but the rule for me was 1 hour of TV during the week and 2 hours on Saturday, 2 hours on Sunday, so they can do it.
And that's
That's
a great way to wrap it up. That's great advice.
You can't let them play video games for 8 hours a day.
Well, of course not. of course not. I think all parents would agree with you, but especially.
But unfortunately, I'm seeing too many kids where that's happening.
Okay. Well, it's good advice. It's good advice if you want to be successful in the
The other
employment
thing
industry.
is, you've got to expose kids to enough different things. Like, how's a kid going to find out he might like acting for a career if there's no school play? How's he
Right.
going to find out he likes
my
fixing
gosh.
cars if there's no auto shop? They've taken these things out of the schools. I think it's completely wrong. Kids are not getting exposed to enough different things to become careers.
Okay.
Okay.
So lots of exposure. Gosh, thank you so much,
Okay.
Temple. We appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time. It's been fabulous. Thank you for joining us
You're
on The
welcome.
Future's Bright.
So Temple, everybody's talking about this book. It's something that's very timely, especially for those of us who have kids that are teenagers or about to be teenagers. Tell our viewers what the new book is.
Well, Deborah Moore, a psychologist out in California, came to me with the idea of doing this book. And one of the big things we wanted to talk about is the problem of certain kids on the autism spectrum getting addicted to video games. And I'm seeing some very bad outcomes. You know, like he's 23 years old, he's in the basement playing video games, and he doesn't do anything else. And Deborah Moore put together a great chapter in the Loving Push on video games. We also have some very nice first-person profiles of people on the spectrum being successful in jobs, which is a really good positive thing. I can't emphasize enough the importance of kids getting jobs when they're in high school, even volunteer jobs at the church or anything. They've got to learn that discipline and responsibility of having a job. You've got to be there on time. You've got to be reliable. When I was 15 years old, I was cleaning horse stalls, and when I was 13 years old, my mother got me a sewing job. I'm seeing too many smart kids on the spectrum that are not learning how to work.
Yeah, and I love the idea, Temple. You talk about this a lot, about how we can't just expect them to be ready for a job suddenly, miraculously, when they turn 18, that there's a whole process that we have to do to help them to be ready, and that we used to do this all the time, that I had to do jobs, odd jobs around the neighborhood well before I was at an age where I was eligible for a job. And you did as well, right?
Well, when I was 13, Mother got me a little sewing job, and when I was even younger, I'd washed a few cars. It's important to have a slow transition from the world of school to the world of work. I'm seeing too often where a child on the spectrum graduates from college, and he has never had a job of any kind of a job. And so if you have a kid in high school, I want to get him out working. He can be in the informal economy when he's young. As soon as he's 14, 16, I want him to get a real job just to learn work skills. If you have individuals in college right now, they need to be doing career-relevant summer internships. I worked at a research lab. It was an unpaid internship where I did work on experiments on rats, actually, and mice. And I had to rent a house for another lady, and it was just set up in the neighborhood. They've got to learn working skills, and that ought to happen before they graduate from school.
Yeah. Well, I love the idea of internships, and you and I had an opportunity to talk a couple of weeks ago about summer camp situations, because I was sharing with you that I'm having a really hard time finding a summer camp that I think is advantageous for my son who's really into tech things. And you had some great ideas about making it happen in the neighborhood, and I wondered if you'd share some of that with our viewers.
Well, let's just look at things. You know, we have a huge shortage in this country right now of car mechanics and diesel mechanics. Well, maybe some retired mechanic needs to set up a small engine repair class to just do with middle school kids so they can find out engines are cool. You know, a lot of schools have taken out hands-on classes. Now, in Texas, I know that some of the places they're putting that back in again. But how are students going to find out what they want to do for a career if they're not exposed? I get asked all the time, how did I get interested in the cattle industry? Because I was exposed to cattle when I was 15. That's how I got interested in them.
Yeah, and so I love this idea of that if we can't find the camp, you were suggesting to me make it happen myself. You really lit a fire in me and inspired me. And I think what a great idea. For families though, and you talk about this, the loving push. This is not about being mean, but about being loving and caring. This is what we do to raise our kids. What do you suggest if a parent is sitting there this summer and they've got a 15-year-old, they're not quite sure how to go about getting their kid an odd job or getting something happening in the neighborhood. What do you suggest?
Well, Mother just found a sewing job. She just saw a sign on a lady's house that said, you know, freelance seamstress, and she just went in and offered up my skills. She knew I was good at hand sewing. It was just done in the neighborhood. The internship at the research lab was just done in the neighborhood. It's set up to the people that that were there in the school and with my mother.
We're here at the show. We're really loving. There's a new show on the Oprah Winfrey Network that's called For Pete's Sake, and it's Holly Robinson Peete and her family. She's got a 17-year-old son who's on the spectrum, and in the most recent episode, both she and her husband took their son to businesses that they frequent and said to the business owner, hey, have you got something here for our child? Is there, can you show him what you do here? I just thought that was really proactive of them, that they didn't wait for somebody to approach them. They went to the business. Do you think that's a good idea?
That's the thing to do. I ask parents all the time, what do you know, shopkeepers, especially independent businesses, just do something in the neighborhood. And that sewing job is a perfect example of just setting it up in the neighborhood.
Yeah, and it seems, as you said, in high schools anymore, there used to be vocational training, and there isn't anymore. But so instead of waiting for the schools to bring it back, you had talked to me about the all-important lawnmower a couple of weeks ago, and how lawnmowers, old lawnmowers are around, and even learning how to repair a lawnmower is something that's a great skill for kids.
Well, it gets a kid interested in engines. He's going to find out that maybe engines interest him. And that lawnmower could then go on and turn into an auto mechanics class. See, the problem is that all of those vocational things have moved to the community college. But that's almost too late. We need to be getting these kids hooked on some of these skilled trades and vocational things before they graduate from high school.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then I wondered if we could take just a second to talk with you, Dr. Grandin, about inclusion and how you feel about, there's a big push right now that a lot of schools have started specific programs that are just for kids with autism, where they're putting them someplace else on campus. Likewise,
now, what age of kids are you talking about?
I'm talking about from kindergarten all the way up through high school. And then there are other schools that are making a big push for inclusion, having everybody in the classroom together. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about either of those models.
Well, sometimes the correct thing to do for a particular kid is something in between. But I'll tell you something I don't want to see. I walk into a brand new autism school, and you got 4 or 5 very severely handicapped kids in a room, and then they're sitting amongst them as a 12-year-old that should definitely not be there, fully verbal, just messing around on a computer. He should be in a gifted class. That's what I don't want to see. See, autism is turned into such a broad spectrum that I'm seeing too many of the Asperger type of kids held behind when they ought to be working for NASA. I've talked to a lot of people at NASA. I know there's people there that are sort of mildly on the spectrum. So one kind of geeky kid gets to go work for NASA or Google, and another geeky kid's playing video games in the basement on Social Security, and they're the same geeky kid.
Yeah.
See, I don't get hung up on the labels. I'm seeing the people. I see them as I talk about it.
Yeah, I got to say, I think that you got such an insight in this area, Dr. Grandin, and I would love to see some of these programs spring up that can fill this gap in a way that's really affordable for families. I think that an industrious parent knows how to get this started, but there are a lot of parents that probably need some help getting these things started. And
well, they just sort of, the other thing I'd say on this, I've worked for 20 years in the construction industry. I would design a project, then I'd supervise its construction. And one thing I learned is, how do you get things done? Like, if you ran out of parts, we got on the phone and called. Now today, you get on the internet and search, they have found the parts. There's an urgency. How do you get it done?
Yeah. It's the problem solving that I think is missing. We talk about teaching critical thinking in high schools and junior highs, but if it's not practical and hands-on, I don't know that the lesson really gets taught.
Well, hands-on things. I remember in sewing, and I loved sewing when I was in elementary school, and I cut some fabric wrong in a wrecked project. And I learned from that you don't rush. Some other time you might make a mistake, and then you just have to figure out some other way to do it. When I made bird kites that I flew behind my trike when I was really little, I experimented with these bird kites. Hands-on things teach practical problem solving. And I think a lot of people today don't know how to do practical problem solving because they haven't done any hands-on things.
Yeah, no, it's true. And a lot of times, I love that the book talks about how we're going to have to push our kids, because I think a lot of people, myself included, I have coddled my kid. You pointed that out to me this fall. We went to lunch together, and I was not letting my son use the restroom by himself, and you went up one side of me and down the other. And he's very grateful to you, Dr. Grandin.
And you know what? He just got right up and he used it.
He did. And whenever I'm being too much of a smother now, he threatens to call you because he knows that you're on his side. And that's good. You know, I think parents need that.
And I knew that at that barbecue restaurant, that restaurant was going to be perfectly safe.
Yes. And he had such a good time with you that day, I have to say. Now, I wonder, as we're getting ready to be in April, Autism Awareness Month, and a lot of people are going to be talking about autism, and already this week there's been a lot in the news talking about autism, and there's a discussion about what the discussion should be. And I'd like to hear from you, Dr. Grandin, about what do you think the discussion about autism should be right now?
Well, I'm very concerned about how broad the spectrum is. And I don't want to see a smart, geeky kid who maybe should work for Google going down the wrong track. You see, the problem is when you just think about it in language, you get locked into the label. See, one advantage of being a visual thinker is I see a geeky kid at a gifted conference, then I go over to an autism conference, they're the same geeky kid. And then I go to a tech company and I see 10 years older, it's the same kind of geeky kid. I want to see them get into those good jobs. And then you've got another end of the spectrum where they're very severely handicapped. They're not going to work for Google. You see, this is the problem we've got with the autism diagnosis. It's so broad, going from someone who remains with very severe handicaps to somebody that ought to be in a gifted program, but they're socially awkward. This is one of the things that's a real problem. Now, when it comes to early intervention, that's one place where that's really improved. You've got 3-year-olds that are not talking. You've got to start working on that kid and working on him right now.
Yeah, I so agree with you about the huge wide spectrum. And I know I promised you that we weren't going to keep you very long, so I want to thank you for being with us. We're going to close out of the recording, but then I'm going to ask you to stay on the line with me for just one quick second when we're done. But thank you so much. And just a last question for you, Dr. Grandin. Do you do anything particular in the month of April to commemorate Autism Awareness Month?
I've got a ton of speaking engagements.
Well, and that is such a great service to our community. You always enlighten us. You always lift us up. And we thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
I got to do the U-turn around the thing? Okay. So, Kelby, do I want the north entry or the south, or does it matter? Okay. Are we doing curbside bag check? Which way, Kelby? Left? Yeah. Kelby, can I go through the T? Yeah, I have a toll tag.
Then you go through the T.
Okay. What do you do that, like, you could just spend 2 hours doing and have it suck all your time?
Oh, I like to look up interesting research articles on animal behavior. Found a really interesting European papers on how wolves are different than dogs that I read last week that were very, very interesting.
Very cool.
Because I've always talked about a brain can be more social emotional or a brain can be more cognitive.
Yeah.
And the wolf turns out to be more cognitive, and we've bred the dog to be more social emotional.
How fascinating is that?
Very, very interesting. The wolves were very good at watching another wolf solve a problem.
We were talking a little bit about television before, and I cannot believe that what you said to me, what you like to watch on television.
Star Trek. I was a Star Trek fan when I was a teenager. I liked the Star Trek Next Generation. I was watching that when I was working on my PhD in the 80s.
And so
Total Star Trek fan.
What's your favorite series, and what's your favorite character, and what's your favorite
Mr.
episode?
Spock was my favorite character.
Love it. And what's favorite episode? This guy is going to hate me.
was a lot of good. My favorite Star Trek movie was the one with the whales.
Yes.
Yeah, I really
mine
liked
too.
that Star Trek movie.
And so sad that we lost Leonard Nimoy this year.
Yeah.
So I didn't know that you like to watch television. Do you like to go to the movies too?
Oh yes, I went and saw Gravity. There's certain movies that have to be seen in a theater, like
Yeah.
Gravity and Avatar.
Yes.
I went to see Inside Out in the theater. I really liked that movie.
What did you think of that?
I liked it. I think about how the emotions interact.
I gotta be honest, I had said after that I thought that it was gonna be a great tool for people to show kids on the autism spectrum about perspective taking.
Yeah.
About what it's like in other people's heads.
Well, no, it's more like how the emotions inside your own head sort of conflict with each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I love The Wizard of Oz, and I love the idea of the ruby slippers. She had the way back home. She just didn't know she had it.
Yeah.
You see, and I think that's a metaphor for a lot of things. A lot of people have the ruby slippers, but they don't know they have them. They don't know they have the key that can open up the door to a lot of really great stuff.
So what would you say was your ruby slipper?
Well, I had, when some opportunities came up, like when I designed those dip vats, that was a major breakthrough for my business. And when the head of the feed yard came up to me and asked me if I'd do it, I said, give me 3 weeks. You know, a lot of people would have been too scared to walk through the door. Now, this is pre-internet, and I knew it would take me 3 weeks to get some of the information I needed, especially on concrete reinforcement, to design the dip vats.
But you did it.
I did it. I was on the phone the next day to the USDA to get the drawings on the concrete reinforcement.
Wow. So I want to journey back to childhood for just a second and talk about friends, because a lot of times people ask about friends. Who was your best friend?
When I was in elementary school, one of my best friends was a girl named Eleanor. And she was the first girl in elementary school to get to take wood shop instead of cooking. And I was the second girl in our school to get to take wood shop. So we liked to make stuff. It's all about making stuff. And I had good friends in high school. Even though I got bullied and teased, I got friends who shared interests. Riding horses together, doing electronics together, doing model rockets together, doing stuff together with other students.
So you found, like your mom says you found your tribe.
Yeah, and you've got to get them in doing things with other people.
And you did a lot of theater, and did you sing as a kid?
Yeah, I did. One of the problems I was singing is I couldn't synchronize my rhythm with somebody else's rhythm.
Do you still have a hard time doing that?
I still have a hard time doing that.
Because we were going to ask you if you wanted to sing something in the car with us.
Well, I think maybe we'll skip that.
Great question. But the one question people always ask us is they want to know if you've ever been in love.
No, never have.
And you don't feel like you're missing anything.
I've seen so much turmoil in so many marriages that I haven't really seen a situation that would be a good model.
And yet you gave me really good marriage advice.
Because I'm a good problem solver. You have to take the problem and cut it down. And in engineering, you have to find the root cause of a problem.
What do you think is your secret to your success as a teacher?
Well, presenting things really clearly.
Yeah.
That's really important. Making things interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's also important that it's something in a class that a student can take home and use. I teach a class in cattle behavior and handling, and I've got a lot of students that are pre-vet that are going to go in the dog and cat. Probably won't be handling any cattle. But I said, you want to design this corral system because it's visual problem solving. You have to figure out how to do it. It's not a cookbook. And then I have my internet project where they can pick out anything in animal behavior, and I make them dig into a narrow subject that I have to approve because I want them digging into Google Scholar and PubMed, Science Direct, and the other databases. They got to learn how to find stuff online, and I'm finding about 2/3 of the students are not very good at that. How about this? Make Magazine. This is the kind of thing that a lot of kids on the spectrum need to be doing, the cool stuff in here. Really interesting.
Make Magazine is going to love that you
Make
did that.
Magazine. That's a wonderful magazine. And I'm okay. Yes, and they're resurrecting old satellites from mission control and an abandoned McDonald's. That's the kind of stuff I really like. These are the kind of magazines we need to get into school. Make Magazine, Business Week, Science, Nature, Wired. We got to show kids out there. There's all kinds of super interesting stuff out there. But if they don't see it, then they don't know about it. I like to geek out on construction sites.
Yeah.
I like to salivate over all the equipment they've got that we didn't have, like really cool man lifts and nice scaffolding. We didn't have any of that stuff.
You didn't.
No, we didn't.
What did you guys have?
Horrid,
compass?
Horrid ladders that were really dangerous is what we had.
I'm going to pull up right here. Okay. We're going to get your stuff out. Yep. Put your back up. Oh. We have to get the mic back from you too. Oh, you took it off already. You're good. I'm attached to mine.
Dr. Grandin, what is it like for you personally to have become the most celebrated person in the field of autism?
Well, I feel it's a responsibility. I get a lot of emails and letters from young kids. In fact, at the last conference I was at, I got a whole envelope of letters from kids in an English class. What makes me pleased is I think I'm inspiring a lot of kids to succeed, because I want to see kids succeed. Now, one problem I'm seeing with some of the fully verbal kids is they're not getting stretched enough. I see kids coming up to me at conferences where nobody's taught them how to shake hands. See, when I was a young child, I had to be party host at my mother's parties. I had to shake hands, say please and thank you, have table manners, learn how to shop. And I'm seeing too many situations where they aren't learning those basic skills.
Yeah, so you really think they need the basic skills that every child should learn?
Yes. Now, in the 50s, every child was taught social skills in a much more structured way. And today, that's not the case. Now, the so-called normal kids, they pick it up. But the autistic kids have got to be taught.
Okay.
And that's not being done enough.
What kind of preconceptions, though, do you think most people have about relating to those with ASD?
Autism is a really big spectrum. You're going all the way from Silicon Valley down to somebody with a lot of intellectual challenges. Now, the kinds of services and things a person needs is very different, those two ends of the spectrum. And I go to different places. I go to Silicon Valley, and I see a lot of people that I know are on the spectrum. And then I go see another kid that's smart at math, but nothing's being done to develop his skills, and he's getting addicted to video games. And they are the same kind of kid. The thing that I'm seeing, especially on the mild end of the spectrum, is too many kids sort of becoming the label. I'm very concerned about them getting a handicap mentality. Then I go over to the meatpacking plant, and there's a whole maintenance shop of old hippies that I know are on the spectrum, and they run that maintenance shop. And they've been there for years and years and years.
Why do you think the numbers, 1 in 68 now, have risen so dramatically?
I think on the mild end of the spectrum, it's increased detection. Because I can think of kids I went to elementary school with, kids I went to college with, that today would be diagnosed on the spectrum. I think that's a big part of it on the mild end of the spectrum. Now, I think there also is some severe autism that may have actually increased because there's more environmental contaminants and there's more medications being given during early pregnancy.
Dr. Grandin, you beg parents not to let their children with autism be defined by the DSM or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Why?
Well, I think the DSM made a big mistake removing Asperger's syndrome, because under the DMS-4, autism you had to have speech delay, Asperger was no speech delay. Now, you could argue scientific reasons for taking out the speech delay stuff, but from a service provider standpoint, you know, the kind of services that somebody's nonverbal has is different than a mild kid with Asperger's. And I'm seeing too many fully verbal kids, less severe than me, getting put into a class with nonverbal kids. I'm seeing too many smart kids not learning job skills. That's another thing that I really push. Because when I was 13, my mother had got me in a sewing job. When I was 15, I was cleaning horse stalls. It's really important that students intern in a job before they graduate from high school. They got to learn that discipline of getting to work.
If you could speak to every business owner in America, what would you say to convince them to hire somebody on the autism spectrum?
Well, there's certain things they can do extremely well. In fact, the SAP Corporation is hiring people with autism. There's another Project Search, where there's work being done with collaborating with hospitals to train them to set up surgical instruments for different types of surgery. And they take longer to train, but once they're trained, they're super, super good and meticulous about making sure the instruments are set up right. And that's got about a 78% employment rate.
So you think the skills that those with ASD have to offer are often overlooked by people
Well,
that
I can,
employ?
as I said before, I can think of kids that I went to college with that definitely were on the autism spectrum. Those individuals are all employed in good jobs. And I think a lot of this gets back pounding those manners in the 50s and the 60s, and kids being on things like paper routes where they learned work skills.
Why do you think the experts in the field of ASDs focus so intensely on the deficits and not on the strengths of autism?
Well, we need to be building up strengths. My ability in art was always encouraged. And I was encouraged to do lots of different kinds of art. If you got a third grader that's good at math and he can do a high school math book, let him do the high school math book. Don't hold them back.
I want to know why you think that so little attention has been paid to the sensory processing issues. What can we learn from those?
Well, I just heard about a brand new study that's been done up at the in California, Dr. Wu, and they took children aged 4 through 12 that had speech delay, and they stayed in their regular programs, ABA or whatever the speech therapy the school was doing, and then they got an hour a day of sensory therapy where they did a lot of variety of stimulation, like walk on different kinds of flooring, smell different smells, do different activities in a mirror, big variety, always doing more than one sensory thing at a time. And it was done as a controlled experiment, where half the kids just got the regular treatment and the other half got this added sensory treatment. And they got some really big, significant improvements. And they made the point of using all very inexpensive things that would be in any house.
There's so much division in the autism community. How do you think we can all come together and find a common ground?
I think that merging Asperger's together with autism has made all of this worse, because you have a segment of very, very severely handicapped kids where they're never going to be able to live independently. That's a very different kind of situation than a mild Asperger's type of kid. You see, you're putting too many apples and oranges together. Every other diagnosis, like dyslexia, learning problems, ADHD, you've got a fully verbal kid. Only in autism, right now, are you getting a range going from, smart computer geek down to somebody that has very, very severe challenges. Now, I think the American Psychiatric Association originally figured the Asperger kids would get into this social communication category. That's not what's happening. Nobody's going into that because there's no funding for it.
As the most admired person in this field, and we are literally becoming an autism nation, what do you think the most important thing is for us to be aware of?
Well, there's a point where personality variants are just normal variation. I think a brain can be made more cognitive and thinking, or a brain can be made more social. Now, at what point does that become abnormal? There's no black and white dividing line. I'm getting concerned that what we're saying is abnormal is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Obviously, a child that has severe speech delay, that's an abnormality. But when you take the kids that are just kind of socially awkward, a lot of those kids are really smart. And then you got the person that's a total social butterfly. And let's think back to the caveman days. I don't think the social yak-yaks around the campfire made the first stone spear.
Dr. Grandin, thank you for inspiring all of us as parents and children.
We have so many parents who've asked questions, and they love your answers. I want to start with a question that we got on Facebook that somebody wants to know your views on inclusion.
Well, I think a lot depends upon the particular situation. And for young children, elementary school children, I want to try to do inclusion as much as what's practically possible, because little kids need to get the socialization. Now, I was one of these teenagers that in a big high school, I was teased to death. It was just absolutely terrible. It just absolutely did not work. And I was one of the teenagers that had to be taken out of a big high school. And where inclusion totally worked for me in elementary school. I was in a little country school, small, very small classes. It was very much, it was a private school, but it was very much like a small rural elementary school that I've seen in rural communities. Older, experienced teachers, and that worked really well. But I was one of the ones that had to be taken out, and I went to special boarding school, and I've had some parents take their kid out and homeschool them. And all I want to say, if they homeschool their kid in high school, they cannot let them become a recluse in their room. When I went away to the special boarding school, I had a tendency to want to do that, and they wouldn't allow that. They let me do lots of different things that I wanted to do. And when I wanted to clean the horse barn, they got me insulated boots so my feet wouldn't freeze off. But I had to be at meals on time. Even though I didn't do much studying, I had to attend classes. One thing they absolutely would not allow was for me to become a recluse in my room. And I had to be out doing things. But there's some kids where getting away from the whole teenage scene is the best thing you can do, and socialize with grown-ups.
Yeah.
Because I'll be perfectly honest, socializing with teenagers is not a life skill that I need.
Well, I think a lot of people would agree with you there, Temple.
But on the other hand, I've seen situations where they decide to homeschool their teenager and he became a video game recluse and ended up on Social Security going nowhere. And that makes me nuts. Because when I go out into the technical world, there's old Aspies and there's old geeks and nerds out there that would be definitely diagnosed on the spectrum today. Old gray hairs my age, and they've got jobs. Jobs they like, and they've kept those jobs.
Well, we've got another parent who wants to know what you think about the recent statistics that somebody was quoted as saying that in 2012 that the numbers for autism at the rate that we're growing could be as high as 1 in 9. And what your thoughts are on those numbers.
Well, some of it's just increased diagnosis. I mean, the geeks and the nerds and the Asperger's, they've always been around. Now, they're going to be changing the diagnostic criteria in May to take the mild, kind of socially awkward person and call them social communication disorder rather than autism, which is really rubbish because the social communication problems are the core deficit in autism as far as I'm concerned. So some of this is just increased diagnosis. And I think there is some severe autism and severe problems that have increased. And there's also a good number of mental retardation that has now being called autism. And mental retardation diagnoses have actually gone down. You see, people seek the autism diagnosis to get services. And I think one of the reasons why in the DMS-5 they're changing that, they're taking out Asperger's, is they're trying to cut down on the amount of people labeled autism. I think the committee actually did that on purpose for that reason. And the problem is diagnosis is not precise. And in my new book, The Autistic Brain, Richard Panik and I are going to be going through the whole entire history of the diagnosis. It makes you kind of sick because it kept changing. It's doctors sitting around a conference room table, making decisions on this.
Absolutely. Have you had a chance to look at the DSM-5, Temple? Do you...
I looked at it when they had it posted on the webpage. I was able to look at it. It's now off the webpage. But I did have a chance to look at it. And basically, Asperger's is going to be removed. And most of the kids that are the Asperger's are going to be called social communication disorder. And they say that that's not autism, which is rubbish. And they're also getting very murky about the speech delay. All of it, more muddled and murky.
And I'm just curious, because we all had that opportunity to look at it and to make suggestions. Do you feel like you would still be considered on the spectrum by the DSM? You would still qualify?
I would. I would definitely still qualify because I had severe speech delay, and when I was a young child, I had all the full-blown symptoms of classic autism: rocking, spinning, tantrums, no eye contact, fixated interest, repetitive behavior. Because basically on the DSM-5, there's two things you got to have. You got to have the social communication problems, and then the other thing is the repetitive behaviors and fixated interests. And I definitely had that. I would definitely still be diagnosed.
Okay. And which kind of leads into the next question. One of our viewers wants to know what problems that you still face being autistic.
Well, I don't multitask well. That's still a problem I face. And fortunately, I have a job that doesn't require multitasking or remembering long strings of verbal information. It's antidepressants have controlled anxiety for me. I'm a visual thinker, and us visual thinkers tend to get a lot of anxiety problems. And a low dose of an antidepressant, some people a little Prozac, Zoloft, or Lexapro. I'm on an old-fashioned tricyclic. Just a little tiny dab stops that constant panic attacks and anxiety. And you have to use very low doses, because if you use too high a dose, you get agitation and insomnia. And if you're interested in that, I'd recommend that you read A Believer in Biochemistry. That's a chapter in my book, Thinking in Pictures, or read the second edition of The Way I See It book.
Spectacular, wonderful. And in particular, this same viewer was asking what really has helped you to become the person that you are today. Was it therapy? Was it social therapy? And what do you feel is the main reason that you've had so much progress in your life?
Well, first of all, I had superb, excellent early intervention, and a kind of early intervention that was done with me when I was totally nonverbal. I did not talk completely fluently until age 4. I had a lot of ABA-type therapy. It wasn't called ABA back in those days, but a lot of things like my speech therapist would hold up a cup and say cup. When I was 3, my mother hired a nanny who played constant turn-taking games with me and my sister, constantly keeping me engaged. And my ability in art was always encouraged. You know, my abilities were encouraged. And I used to just draw endless horse heads, and I was encouraged to draw lots of other things. And limits were set on me. Like if I had a tantrum at school, the rule was no television that night. That was the rule, and it was enforced. Great teachers in elementary school, a very, very good, just old-fashioned teachers in an old-fashioned 50s-style classroom. Then when I went to high school, it was my science teacher, Mr. Patey, the head of the boarding school. Mr. Patey had a really good sense of when to let me off the hook and not study, but he was not going to let me become a recluse in my room. Mr. Carlock, my science teacher, it was a whole lot of things. And then there were some good people in the cattle industry. I mean, the movie makes it look like everybody in the cattle industry was just awful. There were excellent, good people. Jim the contractor, Ted Gilbert at the Red River Feed Yard. There were some excellent ranches that did treat cattle right. And there were some good people, and that kept me going. But people are always looking for the single magic turning point. There's not one. The other thing that really helped me, learning work skills. When I was 13, Mother had me doing a little sewing job 2 afternoons a week in a lady's house, and I took apart dresses and hemmed them. When I was 15, I was cleaning 8 horse stalls. I was doing carpentry work. When I was in college, I did an internship at a research lab where I actually had to rent my own house. You see, you've got to stretch these kids.
Yeah.
I'm seeing too many people on the mild end of the spectrum today, people a lot milder than me, that are playing video games on Social Security because they were never stretched. My take on video games is 1 hour a day.
Okay.
I was allowed to play a 50s video game when I was a little kid for 1 hour a day. And that 50s video game was spinning a brass thing round and round and round that covered up a bolt on my bed. And I was allowed to do that for an hour after lunch, to just veg out and do that. Well, that's the same thing that ought to be done with video games. 1 hour a day.
I love that prescription. I'm going to play this for my son, Temple.
And I would never recommend banning them. Actually, there's some visual spatial skills you can learn from video games. I just was reading an article in one of my Science or Nature magazines. But that article, where there was a benefit in playing video games, it was only 1 hour a day they did.
Okay.
It wasn't 8 hours a day.
Yeah. Well, I love that, because a lot of us parents are asking questions and saying, what's an appropriate amount? And an hour seems like a great, it gives them time to play,
That's right.
but puts a limit on it. So I love that.
That's exactly what Mother did with me with spinning things. I was allowed to have an hour after lunch where I could go in my room and I could spin things, twirl the brass plate on my bed round and round and round, watch it twirl. And then after I came out of my room, I was not allowed to do that.
I got to ask you, Temple, what was it about the spinning that was exciting enough for you to do it for an entire hour? Do you remember what it was about?
Oh, yes, I remember. I could twirl it. It was sort of a hanging brass plate that was on a screw that covered up a bolt that held the bed frame together. And I'd spin it at different speeds. And I'd watch how it went back and forth when it stopped spinning all the way around. And I would experiment all different kinds of speeds of it. And I just sort of studied it like a scientist.
Wow.
And I found it fascinating. Another thing I did is I dribbled sand through my hand. We'd go to the beach. And I'd dribble sand through my hand, and I'd study every little rock of the sand that went through my hand. And I would just stand there all day, and I would dribble the sand at different speeds. You know, hold my fist tighter or hold my fist looser, and just study it.
It's just fascinating, and it kept your attention.
Oh, yes. And I was given some limited times to do these things. But it was on a schedule.
Yeah.
After lunch, I had an hour where I was in my room and I could do this stuff. And then at the table, it was absolutely not allowed. Church, it was not allowed. In the classroom, it was not allowed.
And And when you, how did they work through, what was it like for you transitioning? Was it just that you understood that it was an hour and then it was over?
Well, I understood that, and it was, you see, but this kind of having a schedule started very young.
Okay.
I mean, when the nanny we had 3 meals every day, and they were on time. Breakfast at 7, lunch at noon, dinner at 6.
So
And
structure was really important.
I had structure, but sometimes, things changed, and I didn't usually I got nervous about changes when I was in high school, and I was going full-blown on anxiety attacks. They wanted to change the schedule around in high school. I got all nervous about that. Now I've had to move out of my office. We have a mess now where they're rebuilding our building, remodeling our building, and we had to move all our offices. My 22 years of junk in my faculty office, and we moved into trailers.
Wow.
For a year. Well, I did that, but you know what? I did it slowly.
Okay.
Like 3 months before it was time to move, I was de-trashing my office. And fortunately, they provided gigantic industrial-sized garbage cans for all the faculty to de-trash their office, because the entire faculty had to move out of this building.
Yeah.
But I did it slowly.
You know what strikes me, Temple, is that transition would be hard for anyone, but you are so good at recognizing what you need to be kind to yourself and to be successful, and then you do that. And I don't know that the rest of us do that.
Well, and I did it, and fortunately they had these big garbage cans, because I hate to say it now, my knees are getting bad, and I can't walk upstairs lifting anything because my knees are going screaming, ouch, don't, you're hurting your knees. And I would have had to, I simply can't carry all the stuff.
Yeah, but you know where your strengths are, and you know how to compensate when you have an area that isn't a strength, and that's something that we can all learn from.
Well, and I've learned things in organization. Like for my calendar, I've got to have a calendar where I can see an entire month.
Yeah.
I hate those calendar books where it's a new page for each day. Hate them. Hate them. Oh, I get those from American Express, and I just give them away. I hate them.
And by the week doesn't help you either. You need to see the whole month.
I want to see a whole month.
Wonderful.
I can look at it, and then when I make my plane reservations, I can look at that calendar, and then I visualize how much time I'm going to need between events. And I know that, and let me tell you, I know all the airline routing now.
I'll bet you do.
I have that about memorized.
I'll bet you do. I've got a question here that you might decide is too personal, and you don't need to answer it if you don't want to, but somebody wants to know what role faith and spirituality plays in your life.
Well, when I was young, I did a lot of thinking about a lot of the big questions. But basically now, I figure the meaning of life is if the things that you do help make the world a better place. And what I mean by that is I have to use specific examples because I think very concretely. When a mother says, your book helped my kid go to college, that makes me happy.
Yeah.
Or you solved my kid's sensory problems. And boy, I can tell you, we've got to look at sensory problems.
Yeah.
And there's some individuals that can't tolerate a noisy Walmart. I'll give you some tips on sensory problems to help desensitize. Let the individual initiate the dreaded buzzer on the scoreboard or the worst ringtone on a phone or whatever the thing is they can't stand. If the person on the spectrum initiates it, or if they hate Walmart, let them control how much Walmart they got to tolerate. And when they give a signal, you take them out.
I love that.
Because you kind of have to stretch it.
Yeah.
And then there's some individuals that will never tolerate that Walmart, especially some of you nonverbal individuals.
Yeah. Well, you know, that's great advice, Temple, because we've had a couple of parents, one parent in particular who's written in and talked about how her son, his lunch and his physical education take place in an old-fashioned gymnasium that has all wood floor, and it's very echoey in the room, and that it's hard for him. He's supposed to be socializing during lunch, but there's all this echoey noise.
Well, the problem is he cannot hear.
Oops.
I cannot hear in that environment either.
Yeah.
When I'm in a meatpacking plant, I cannot hear. I have got some auditory processing problems. I don't hear hard consonants. So when I'm in a meatpacking plant and we have to talk, I say, we got to go outside. I can't. I just tell him I can't hear.
Yeah.
And one of the problems he's got in that echoey gym is he simply cannot hear what other people are saying because there's auditory problems. The other thing, if you wear earphones or earplugs in the noisy gym, you've got to have those earplugs off for at least half the time because otherwise your brain will get more and more and more sensitive. You know, so half the day when it's quiet, get that headphone off and get those earplugs out.
And well, one of the things that we had recommended too is going in and recording what it's like in the gymnasium and maybe slowly desensitizing. But
that can help.
And what I'm hearing from you is to let the child turn the sound on and turn it off to desensitize.
Put it on the recorder. Put it on the recorder, but let the child turn it on and off. And that will help desensitize it so it'll tolerate the gym.
Yeah.
But what it will not do, it's not going to solve the problem with hearing conversations in the gym.
Yeah.
It will just make it so he can tolerate the gym. The other thing is, the other big problem in so many schools is fluorescent lights.
Yeah.
That's a serious problem for maybe 10% of the people on the spectrum. See, the problem we've got in the sensory stuff, it's so variable. Yeah. One kid's got visual problems. Another kid's got touch problems. Another kid's got auditory problems. And fluorescent lights, 60-cycle fluorescent lights are just the worst. And if you're in a classroom with that, then get the kid's desk over by the window. Or if you're stuck in a room with no windows and fluorescent lights, get some incandescent light bulbs in old lamps. Just get some old floor lamps, bring them in from home, put them next to the kid's desk. The other thing that can help is try printing books and things on different pastel papers. Mm-hmm. Experiment with the colored backgrounds on computers. And also experiment with colored glasses, like the Irwin colored glasses. But that's way too expensive for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So just experiment with Walmart's blue-tinted ones, some pink glasses, some pale tans, real pale different sunglasses. Just experiment with that.
Interesting. I know a lot of schools have their for children who are dyslexic, they have, it almost looks like a paint chip fan that has different colored plastics that you can put over text for a child to be able to read with dyslexia.
And that helps too. And some of the autistic kids need to try that.
Okay, great.
And then for these kids that need that colored paper, if the classroom has windows, mm-hmm. and there's fluorescent lights in the room, put that kid's desk over by the windows, and that will help a lot. That's a real simple thing you can do.
Great advice. We had a bunch of questions come in about potty training, about children who get obsessed with different parts of potty training. And for instance, one child that the mom reports that she wants to play in the toilet water and wants to flush it constantly, but does not want to pee in it. And another parent wants to know, is it common for kids with autism not to want to use the bathroom, and why?
All right, let's start out with sound sensitivity. See, when it comes to running water and flushing the toilet, some kids love it, and there's other kids that are terrified of the noise. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes you'll have a child that will use the toilet at home, but he won't use this one at school. Mm-hmm. And the problem you've got at school is they have those industrial ones that are really, really super loud.
Yeah.
And I can tell you the worst toilets, vacuum toilets on planes. Oh, yes. If I had been exposed to that as a child, I would have been terrified. I would have been sure I would have been sucked out of the airplane.
Absolutely.
And I use them, and I use them all the time, and I press the button and I grit my teeth. Mm-hmm. I tolerate them.
Yeah.
But I can just, they try to find flights for some of these kids that don't have a vacuum toilet. They have the old-fashioned blue juice one, because those vacuum toilets, they are scary.
Oh, they are.
So you see, that is a noise sensitivity problem. Okay, now the other problem you have, especially with a nonverbal child, is he doesn't know what you're supposed to do in the toilet. You see, their sensory system is so fragmented. And if you want to understand this, you need to get Tito Muckapedahe's book, How Can I Talk If My Lips Don't Move? Mm. And Tito's a nonverbal person with autism that types independently, and he describes a scrambled sensory world. It's sort of like looking at everything with Picasso vision. And he describes that when he had to learn how to put on a T-shirt, it had to be put on him very, very slowly so he could get what the whole task was of going through the head hole, going through the armholes. And one of the things you got to do with someone like that is demonstrate how to use the toilet slowly, and he's got to see the entire thing. Like, how does the stuff get in the toilet? He's got to see it.
Okay.
You can't leave anything to the imagination. Because he's got to watch the whole task.
Okay.
Otherwise, they won't understand what they are supposed to do.
Well, it's great advice.
You can't break it up into steps. It's what I call whole task training.
Yeah. It's great advice, because I think, you know, we all are so concerned about privacy, but making sure that somebody models the whole task. It maybe isn't the prettiest thing.
They gotta see how the waste comes out of the person and drops in the toilet.
Okay,
because
great.
that step is often left out. I have talked to parents where their child would do it in front of the toilet, then pick it up and put it in the toilet.
Right.
They did that because they didn't understand the task. And when you read Tito's book, How Can I Talk When the Lips Don't Move, how he describes learning how to put a T-shirt on.
Mm-hmm.
And he describes a fragmented visual world. I think you'll understand better on working with some of these kids.
Interesting. Okay, we will definitely look into that book. We have a bunch of people who wrote in and specifically just wanted to thank you, Temple. I can't leave that out, because so many people wrote in and said that your lectures and your books have helped them. I certainly am one of those parents. But a couple of parents wrote in and wanted to know what your feelings were about the Sandy Hook massacre now that there's been a little bit of time, and how you feel about the way society looks at individuals with autism.
Well, that guy had a lot of the classic symptoms, and he's an example of a kid that was allowed to become a recluse in his room playing violent video games. And then he was playing violent video games, shooting the same gun that he used for the actual crime. What should have been done with that kid, he should have had a job at a computer store. Get your butt out of the house, and you're going to work in a computer store. And that should have been done with him when you're going to take him out and homeschool him? He should have been working in a computer store. Yeah. These kids have got to learn how to work.
Yeah.
And that is something that started with me at 13. And when you look at my Different Not Less book, Different Not Less is 14 old gray hairs like me that were diagnosed later in life, and that gave them a huge, wonderful insight into their marriages and their relationships. But one of them, who was a computer specialist, her boss asked her, well, if you'd been diagnosed earlier, would you have become an expert computer person at Intel? And this is the thing that worries me. These kids are not learning any work skills. And just about everybody in Different Not Less had paper routes. Yeah. And I know that those are gone. You know what the new paper route is? Dog walking.
There you go.
That's a great job for 12-year-olds. How about swimming pool cleaning, especially if you live down south? Because I want something that's not seasonal.
Yeah.
You know, mowing lawns is good, but it's seasonal.
Yeah.
But these kids have got to learn how to work.
Absolutely.
Museums will take kids as young as 12 years old for tour guides.
Okay.
You have to be 16 to volunteer in an animal shelter. They have got to learn work skills, and yes, volunteer work does count.
Well, and our entire topic this week, we're talking about on the show transitioning from teenage years to adulthood, and some of the things that we're talking about are job related, because I think on everybody's wish list for every child is that they be a productive member of society.
Well, the thing that drives me absolutely nuts is when I go out to a meatpacking plant, there's gray hairs like me all over that meatpacking plant that run the maintenance department. They do all kinds of jobs there, not just working on the line. That's like grunt work. And they're as spectrum as they could be, but they're undiagnosed.
Yeah.
And half of Silicon Valley is on the spectrum. You know, it's where people have got to learn work skills. And then you have the kids, you know, there's different kinds of minds. There's the visual thinkers like me, going to be really good at building things. There's a lot of these kids that ought to be going to the skilled trades. We have a huge, huge shortage of auto mechanics. And one of the worst things the schools ever did was taking out auto shop and metal shop and wood shop and art and all of those, cooking, all of those hands-on classes that can turn into great careers.
Yeah.
You know, and then sometimes we can do too many accommodations. Like here's one that's too much of an accommodation. There's a little elementary school kid that's too shy to get up and do his public speaking in class, so they let him do it on Skype. I'm going, no way. You're going to have to get up in front of the class.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you right now, when I gave my very first talk in graduate school, you know what I did? I panicked and I walked out. My very first talk. So then what I learned after that, got to have really good slides. And then if you freeze, you've got your slides.
Oh, that's great, because we actually had a question from somebody wanting to know, what are your tricks to get over fear of public speech? So having slides that you can go to and take a moment.
Well, let me just explain what we do with my students, because my graduate students have to, do their little 10-minute presentations at the American Society for Animal Science, where they tell about their research. And the thing I work with my students on is having really good PowerPoint slides, where you start out with the reason for doing the research, the methods, the animals, the statistics, the procedure, the results, the discussion, the conclusions, and nice pictures on your slides, and then enough writing on your slides so if you panic, you read them.
There you go.
It's not the end of the world for your first talk.
Yeah. And you've talked in so many different venues now, and we've shown your TED Talk more than once here on the show because it's brilliant. And I just wonder, were you extra nervous for that, or was it just fine? Did you feel at home? I would think that would be panicking.
I was okay because I've done talks in enough big places. Mm-hmm. And I was okay with that. The only thing at the TED Talk I had problems with is they wanted me to wear this mic that was taped to my face. Mm. And I said to them, I've got to wear that for half an hour beforehand to get used to it. And I did that, and they had a lot of lights, which I don't really like, but I tolerated it because I wanted it to look good, and they wanted it to sound good. Yeah. And that's why they taped the mic to my cheek.
Well, it did look good, and it sounded great, and you were brilliant, and we love that TED Talk. I have another viewer who, her question is, how can I learn to control involuntary movements? I have trouble with it, and it's very distracting.
And what you have to try to do is to turn it into an involuntary movement that doesn't bother people. Mm. I know a guy that has Tourette's. And you'd never know it because he twitches his mouth and his eye. Mm. And it's something that, he does it every 30 seconds, but nobody notices. I never noticed it until he told me about it. If you can try to switch the involuntary movement into something that's less distracting. There's a lot of people that sit in meetings and they jiggle their leg in meetings. Have you ever done that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And there are people who click their pens.
Well, that gets annoying.
It does.
And I do an awful lot of doodling.
That's great.
Where I just take a pen and I'm drawing circles and I'm drawing little triangles and stars and stuff on a piece of paper. You could do that. You could get a fidget ball. I think what you need to try to do is to try to turn that into something. Because what could be done with Tourette's is you can't get rid of the tics. What you do is you change them into something else that's a lot less annoying and distracting. Okay. And what this guy did is he took a bad verbal tic and he turned it into twitching his mouth and his eye every 30 seconds, and nobody notices it.
There you go. Wonderful. Okay. Another viewer wants to know, what's your experience with fragmented vision, seeing only the details of things and not the whole picture? They report that, she says, I see so many details, but I can never just see the whole object that I'm looking at, and I'm wondering what this is and how to understand it.
Well, I had a student that had that problem, and she was not autistic. She was dyslexic, and I remember one time we were sitting at a traffic light next to this art store, and I say, Artarama, that's a funny name for store. And she said, all I saw was the A. And Tito describes this, and how can I talk? My lips don't move. Donna Williams, in her book, Autism, An Inside-Out Approach, describes this problem. Now, I don't have this. This is where autism is very, very, very variable. Mm-hmm. It's real, real variable, and I don't have this problem. It's this is something that, not everybody on the spectrum has.
Mm-hmm. But that they can go to those resources and maybe learn some more about it and what to do about it. So Tito's book again.
That's right.
There's somebody who wrote in, and I'm unaware of this. Apparently, you are very good friends.
Somebody's at my door. I'm going to have to let them in. Just a minute.
Okay. Well, hold on. I'll let all the viewers know that who we're talking to right now is Temple Grandin, if you're just tuning in. She's joining us via phone, and she's answering parent questions that you guys have written in. And it's a very exciting opportunity for us to be able to talk with her, and we hope we'll have more opportunities to do this. So if you haven't written in a question for Temple Grandin, Shannon, and you still want to do, because we keep a pool of them so that if we have the opportunity to talk to her again.
Oh, sorry, this is where I don't multitask very well.
Oh, no, I thought you did very well. Are you kidding me?
Okay.
And we were just filling our viewers in on what was happening. So, but do you have a few more minutes to talk, Temple?
Yes, I do.
Okay, great. So, somebody wrote in and said that you have, that you're good friends with somebody who's blind.
Yes.
And that their best friend is blind. And their question is, do you narrate and describe scenes with ease to the friend that's blind? And does that build trust between you? Because the person reports that they're very inspired by the fact that you also have a friend that's blind.
Well, she was my roommate, and we would used to go to movies, and we'd sit in the back row, and I would whisper to her what the visual parts of the movie.
How beautiful.
And then she had a radio that would pick up TV signals, and we used to watch Star Trek on her radio.
How wonderful.
And Star Trek was pretty good on the radio because I knew what the visuals looked like.
And was it easy for you to describe those things to her?
Yes, that was very, very easy because I'm a total visual thinker.
There you go.
So it was very, very easy for me to describe the visuals to her.
What a gift to each other. You must have been.
She was the best roommate I ever had.
And Temple, is it easy for you to have friends? Is it something that you struggle with, or is it something that you're really adept at now?
Well, most of my friends are through shared interests. And one thing I really recommend to all the parents out there, get autistic kids or kids that have got whatever diagnosis they got, whatever labels on them, get them involved with things with shared interests. School play, band, school newspaper, art club, computer club, robotics, Future Farmers of America, 4-H, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. Get involved in activities where they have a shared interest.
I think that's great advice. We actually had a parent write in on Friday about having a teenager and how there aren't supports, but that she has him in a sailing club and a couple of other clubs.
Good.
And we had said, clubs are great. So she felt like maybe, but she's wanting something more. And I know you talked earlier about volunteering to get them ready for job skills. Is there anything else we should be focusing on with our teenagers?
Well, middle school, we need to start focusing on job skills. And volunteer work does count, and I think it needs to be work outside the home. It could be a tour guide, it could be clean the swimming pools, walk some dogs. People that live in the city, live in an area where there's a lot of dogs around. Walking dogs is, as far as I'm concerned, that's a new paper route.
Okay.
We need to be giving these kids a job that's a lot like a paper route, where they got to do it every day and have that responsibility of doing it.
And does it need to be something that is in their area of interest, or it just is a job and they get paid for it? Or
sometimes it needs to just be a job. I don't think cleaning pools would be in anybody's interest.
Yeah.
But sometimes they just need to do a job.
Okay.
They need to learn how to work.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think for a lot of our kids on the autism spectrum, they have a really good work ethic, especially those that have had a great deal of ABA. They sort of get it, that my time is taken up doing this right now. But I do see that as you get into those teenage years, it gets a little bit rougher.
Well, I don't think, you see, first of all, I watched a big, long talk with Tristan Smith, who's a specialist in ABA, and he said basically ABA is a little kids program, unless it's real severe autism. And you get most people on the higher end of the spectrum. I mean, they're beyond ABA.
Yeah.
We need to be, but they need to learn work skills.
Absolutely. Good morning and welcome to Autism Live on World Autism Awareness Day. Our very special guest this morning, as you can see right from the jump, is the fabulous and wonderful Dr. Temple Grandin. Dr. Grandin, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Well, it's really great to be here.
Well, and I mentioned before we got started that I wanted to take just a second at the top of the show to talk about World Autism Awareness Day, that this is a day that was created by the United Nations, and it is a day that asks all nations to step forward, to think about individuals who are on the autism spectrum and to find ways to bring the dignity of these individuals together and to call nations to ask them to problem solve, to be able to get resources to these individuals and for them to be treated with the respect that they so richly deserve. Every year they have a special message to nations, a call to action about a specific thing. I don't know what they intended for this year's call to action to be, but it is in fact that individuals with the autism spectrum are treated fairly during this COVID emergency, that they do not lose resources that are vital to them, that they don't lose progress that was hard won and fought for them, and that they continue in this emergency to have access to medical care, that there is consideration given to how they need to access the medical care, and that they continue to have access to all of the things that a person, any person has the right to, things that shelter, employment, education, all of those things. I think we can all agree how important that is. And I'm so excited because we have Dr. Grandin here today to be answering your questions live. I just want to say that there are lots of ways to connect with us right now. If you're watching us on autism-live.com, then you know that there's a chat button at the very bottom. I'm monitoring what you guys write in. That's completely anonymous. We are also monitoring comments on Facebook and on YouTube and on Twitter. So you can be writing in on any of those right now. Dr. Grandin, should I go ahead and jump in with a question that we had? Okay, so, and of course, I'm gonna find it here, and I had it, and then I don't know where it went. It was a question that we had about a 4-year-old, a parent asking for how can we get our 4-year-old to connect with us? And of course, in this moment in time, I cannot find the actual for it. Hang on a second. I don't know where it is, but it was about a 4-year-old. How do we get him to interact with us? And she said that she feels that it seems like he's very in his own world and wanting to connect with him as much as possible as a 4-year-old.
Well, the first thing, I don't know whether this 4-year-old can talk or not. Now, if this 4-year-old can talk, you always want to give him an opportunity to use his words. Let's say you know he wants the juice. Instead of giving him the juice, quietly say to him, use your words. And then you've got to give him time to respond. These kids are sort of like a phone on maybe only one bar of surface. It takes time to load the web page or whatever. Give them time to respond. Always make opportunities to use your words. Another thing is engaging in little turn-taking games. Let's say he's spinning a wheel on a toy car. Well, let's take turns spinning the wheel on the toy car. Turn it into a turn-taking game.
No, I just I muted myself so that you could speak. We had another question, and you and I had talked about it briefly before we came on. It was a longer question. I'm going to consolidate it. That a mom wrote in. She's a mom with 3 kids. 2 have other diagnoses. She's 37. She has Tourette syndrome. One of her children has ADHD, and another has autism. But they all exhibit some form of a sensory issue. They've all toe walked, and they have these different issues. She says, we're all different, but we're the same. And she's wanting to know from you, she suspects that even though her diagnosis is Tourette's and her daughter's is ADHD, she's wondering if maybe they also have autism to a lesser degree and what these 3 things might have in common. I wanted you to talk about that.
Research on Google Scholar. Now, Google Scholar is the scientific version of Google. And if you go on Google Scholar, you type in autism and ADHD, you're going to find, and genetics, you're going to find there's genetic crossover. There's also crossover in brain scans where some of the features are the same. See, these diagnostic categories are not precise. It's not like a COVID test, and I want to say a high quality COVID test done correctly that will give you a definitive diagnosis. It's not precise. These categories have blurry boundaries. Sensory issues, those happen in many different disorders, both developmental and head injuries. You also can get sensory issues. So their social awkwardness tends to go with a number of these different things. It's not real precise.
Okay. We have a question specifically about the COVID-19 emergency. A parent writes in and says, what advice do you have for a 17-year-old on the spectrum who is having acute anxiety about COVID-19? And they want to know specifically what has helped you with anxiety.
I have researched every piece of scientific literature on the shelf in the pharmacy medications that might treat COVID. And even before Donald Trump talked about hydroxychloroquine, I already had found that drug. So just knowing that there's things to possibly treat it. Now, I want to emphasize a lot of stupid things have been done with drugs. Hoarding, it's totally bad. People need that drug for lupus. They need it for rheumatoid arthritis. Also, it's never to be used for prevention. It's to be used for moderate to severe COVID. All the tests haven't been done, but there are things to treat it. Computers right now are finding even more things. So that made me less afraid that there's actually some stuff to treat it. And also I've looked at the statistics. I am in the at-risk group. I probably have a 4% chance of dying. Well, Ebola is a 30% chance. Another thing that put it in perspective for me is I fell 5 years ago in my own bathtub. And a week later, I realized I had a dent here at the base of my skull. That bathtub came that close to killing me. The number didn't come up. I'm more worried about the bathtub. But the reason why everybody's got to stay in their homes is if everybody went out of their homes, well, the hospitals wouldn't even be able to treat people. Right now in New York, they're taking refrigerated trucks. I have to say that's something we use in my industry to haul food in, and they're putting dead bodies in them. That's really horrible. You just would, if too many people got sick all at once, the hospitals cannot deal with that. There's a lot of things that have to be learned, such as if you get COVID, how long do you stay immune? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. Hopefully a long time. If there's a vaccine gets developed, is it going to have to be a flu shot every year, or will it be like one of the more permanent kinds of vaccine? I don't think people know at this point. But I find that in my animal behavior research, if you turn on the seek emotion, that turns off fear. You might want to look at the Jack Penskep emotional systems in my book, Animals Make Us Human. And while I'm looking up all this information online, that made me less afraid, because there are some things to treat it with, and they need to learn how to use those things, and they need to learn how to use them quickly, because we want to try to prevent people from going on respirators.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think everybody's entitled to a certain amount of anxiety about this, but a lot of it is that there's so much of this that isn't in our control. But what I'm hearing you say is that you felt more in control when you did some research.
I did some research, and I found out that now you've got doctors and dentists hoarding this drug. This is bad. Then you've got people that have lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. You see, what these drugs do is they stop the horrible inflammation in the lungs. They put out the fire of inflammation. People with lupus and rheumatoid arthritis that can't get this drug. That is really bad.
Yeah, we need to be very considerate about it. No, it is not. And Julie has written in and said, our 15-year-old hardly speaks and spends way too much time in his room. He only comes out to eat, shower, and use the restroom. He refuses to go anywhere and refuses to cut his hair. With COVID-19, his socialization has critically decreased. Telecounseling starts next week, and they said help.
Well, I've talked to two boys that got totally addicted to video games. And one of the things that saved them, now I realize this would be hard to do now, is they got interested in fixing cars and doing robotics. And for one of the students, he's now fixing cars. Another one is fixing trains for the railroad. They found out that mechanics was more interesting than video games. Mm-hmm. So what we got to do is give him a replacement for whatever he's doing in his room. You have to replace it with something else. Now, I like to make things. That's why I came up with this little book, a little book, Calling All Minds. It's all my childhood things to make. Some of these things people could make things. We've got to figure out other stuff to do, but you have to replace the video game with something else. Now, with all this stuff going on now with COVID, these games where people could talk to each other, a certain amount of that I think would be good. 5 hours a day, no, but maybe an hour or so a day to talk to their friends online. But you have to replace it with something else. So, see, the first thing I'm going to ask the parents, does this kid like to do anything else other than playing video games? I'm going to assume that he's doing either that or movies or something like that constantly.
Well, and we'll wait to see if she writes us back to tell us what other things he likes. You and I had an opportunity right before we came on live, because she mentioned the telehealth, to talk a little bit about telehealth. And because you were saying to me how important it was for the little kids to continue to get their therapy. We were talking
absolutely.
We were talking about how it is a medically necessary treatment, and that when you can continue services in whatever way you can continue services, that it's advisable to do that. And we were sort of talking about telehealth and about, you said something that I thought was really interesting. I was telling you how impressed I am with parents, how parents have stepped up and said, teach me how to do this. I want to know how to do this. And that they're sometimes being the facilitators while the therapist does therapy via telehealth. And do you remember what you said, Temple? You said, I know these parents
what the therapist can do is they can coach the parent over the video link on how to do the speech therapy, how to do the ABA. It's very important with the young children to do a lot of turn taking. That was a lot of emphasis on that. We can play board games and things like that. That's stuff we could do. And they can coach the parents on how to work with the child, because we've got to keep working on speech. I don't want to lose, months of working on a kid to get them talking.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't want to have we want to really minimize regression and see if we can continue on. But I was really inspired when you said, because I said, a lot of parents are afraid that they can't do it. And you said
they can, but they need professional coaching. Okay, back before COVID, people would ask me, they'd say, our school does, 2 hours of speech a week or something like that. And I said, well, that's not enough. But I said, what it is enough for is for that teacher to be a coach, to teach you and teach some volunteers on how to work with your kid. And you need to look at that hour of therapy you get a week from the school as they're your coach, because I definitely believe in professional guidance. And that can be done, over the video. Another thing that got brought up on distance education is whether there are enough devices. I mean, if the parents have a job online, they're going to need a computer. Trying to do school on a phone is like completely atrocious. Then if there's only one decent computer, then we're going to have to figure out how to take turns on it. This is where making a new schedule. I've read some, I'm a big NASA fan. You took me out to Houston, NASA.
That was so much fun.
It was really fun. I'm a total NASA geek. And you have to, on the space station, people have to live together. They need some alone time. They also have very structured work time. They have to not make messes in the bathroom and things like that. If there's only one computer, then we're going to have to make a schedule on how it gets used.
Yeah.
In fact, and sometimes it depends what kind of work the parent has. Then there's some stuff that will have to be done on a phone, but then we need to figure out which things need the big computer, the big screen.
Yeah, I loved because you and I were reminiscing about that trip to NASA and talking about that, because they took us into the model, the actual size model of the space station.
Really cool.
It was so cool, but picturing people living in that small of a space and knowing that they can't go out to the store, it really sets an example for us of how we have to live. We have to cohabitate in a respectful way, and that they take care of business every day. I know you were saying earlier this morning, keeping to that schedule, getting up every morning, getting dressed, important.
I'm making sure that I am dressed for work by 8. Not be slouching around in pajamas. I think that's important. And then if
Absolutely.
hopefully there's enough devices available, for me, if I was doing courses online, I would I'd get my heavy duty schoolwork done in the morning, or heavy duty report writing. If it's let's say a parent, you're really hard work where you got to think, done in the morning when you're fresh. That's what works for me. And then you can do easier jobs in the afternoon, have time off. One thing they did learn on the space station is that they do have to, each astronaut has to have some alone time where he can talk in private on the laptop, you know, to the family, watch a movie by himself. And then there's other activities that eat together. That's something they do together. And then you have to make sure that, you know, people, before they go up there, get to pick what food they want. There's some choices. Well, somebody's got to not be taking somebody else's food. This is the sort of thing that would really cause a lot of friction on the space station.
Well, one of the questions that we had come in early, Temple, was that somebody was asking, what is your preferred food during this COVID emergency? Like, what's the one food that you keep stockpiled in your house because you really can't do without it?
Well, I really like some dark chocolate, but I've got to make sure people have given me a lot of that I'm really limiting how much of that I eat. I still am eating the same yogurt and fruit for breakfast. I have that. Fortunately, I've got people shopping for me, which I really appreciate. And it's been making me think about food in a different way. You know, and my boss, most time they buy stuff I like. I bought some stuff I did not like, but I had to eat it. We cannot be wasting food. When you've got people in that Amazon warehouse or some other place that are getting it ready for you, that every trip to the grocery store, there's an exposure risk. No, you eat it.
Absolutely.
There was some sliced processed turkey that I really hate, and it's getting eaten.
There you go. You're a good role model. Now we've got a couple of people who are writing in and letting you know that that they themselves have had diagnoses. One who says, "I got a late diagnosis. What services would you recommend to help me cope?" And another person,
is this a teenager or an older adult? I don't need to know the exact age, but I need to know, am I dealing with a 10-year-old, a teenager, or an older adult?
Well, they're saying they got a late diagnosis, so I think you're talking about an actual adult.
Well, there's a lot of people. We have a book, Different Not Less, which is 14 old Asperger's or people diagnosed on the spectrum later on in life. And where they found it really made a difference was with their relationships. You see, this is where, you know, I had a lady come up to me in the Denver airport one time, and she said, "Oh, now I understand my engineer husband after I read your book, Thinking in Pictures." Now, on the job front, I think some people are getting too overcoddled when they should be getting out and learning work skills, because all the people in the Different Not Less book had jobs ranging from a tour guide at a history museum to IT and a medical doctor. All different kinds of jobs. I didn't just fill it up with the computer geeks. And half of them are on the autism spectrum out there in Silicon Valley. I've been there. They avoid the labels. But
Absolutely.
The first step is realizing, you know, that you think differently. And for relationships, that it's been a good thing for a lot of people. And that's why I did the Different Not Less book. And all of the people in that book are employed.
Wonderful. I should point out that Temple has been prolific and written a lot of books that are really amazing resources. And you can find all of her books on Temple. They're available on Amazon. Look at that.
New edition of The Way I See It. Brand new 5th edition of The Way I See It. A whole lot of little short articles. We updated it. Just came off the press about a week ago.
Wonderful. And so people can go to templegrandin.com to get the books, but they're also available on Amazon if you want to put it in your Amazon cart as part of your delivery. Now, Katie has written in and said, "I have anxiety a lot. I have autism and ADHD, and I'm worried a lot. How can you help me with my anxiety?" But Katie does not say how old she is. Katie,
this is the problem.
You
see, because I've been on antidepressant medication since my early 30s. Because as I went through my 20s, my anxiety got worse and worse and worse. My body was like in a constant state of fright. I remember telling Dustin Hoffman when he did Rain Man, imagine how nervous you were when you did your first interview to land a big part like that. Well, that's the way I feel all the time. And in my book, Thinking in Pictures, I describe what it was like before and then taking antidepressants. I've worked with other people that are visual thinkers that are very, very anxious, and they've been able to remain employed by taking a low dose of Prozac. I'm taking one of the old-fashioned drugs. The mistake that gets made with antidepressants when they're used for anxiety is too high a dose. Label doses are often way too high. You might have to take only half to 3/4 of a label dose on some of these different drugs. But basically, antidepressants saved me. I don't think I would be here. And one of the things that happened with me is some of my stress-related health problems cleared up. The colitis cleared up. But, there's a place for medication. Now, way too many meds are given to little kids. That's why I wanted to know age. Now, I was a full-fledged adult when I took it.
Okay.
My brain was now, fully developed. But there's some people that are going to need a little help from biochemistry, and that's why the chapter is called A Believer in Biochemistry. The other thing that helps is exercise. I'm doing now modified push-ups every night. I was doing sit-ups, but my sciatic nerve acted up, so then I had to change that to modified push-ups. And what I do is a burst of hard exercise. And if I don't do that every night, I cannot sleep. So that needs to be something people get into their schedule. And I had already developed exercises I could do in a hotel room. I don't really like going to the gym in a hotel, something I could do in the room. And I want to warn you that the first time I did the sit-ups, I could do like 2. You have to work up to it over several months. But those are things that helped me. The other thing is there's a point where you just got to get out and do things. Mother always gave me a choice. When I was 15, I was afraid to go to my aunt's ranch. Mother gave me a choice. I could go for a week or I could go all summer. Not going, that wasn't going to be one of the choices, but always choices. But there's a point where I recommend reading that one chapter in particular on how I dealt with anxiety. And the thing that was weird is that when the colitis flared up, I was less anxious. It was really, really weird.
Interesting.
But I don't think I'd have any insides left if I hadn't gone on the medication. And I know other people professionally, visual thinkers, one that's definitely autistic, other 2 are definitely not autistic, where a little dose of Prozac kept them off the drugs and the alcohol, and they'd be in the gutter if they weren't on the Prozac.
Wow. Now, our mom who asked before about the young man who is in his room all the time, the 15-year-old, she has written back to us and she said that you were right. He is obsessed with video games. She says his school was creating a special project for him, for him and a group to create a new sign for the school. With the school being closed, that is on hold. He loves art. We brought more than $200 in supplies at Christmas as a Christmas gift, but he has no interest in any of it, Temple.
Well, you can still design a new sign for the school, and you can display it online and show it to people, and you can still work on design stuff. This is still going on now. Like we're doing cattle stuff. Mark, my assistant's doing cattle stuff, and we can't go anywhere. We can't travel, but we're still doing design work. People write in to me about livestock stuff. We're still doing it.
But Temple, how did your mother motivate you? I'm always amazed by the fact that your mother was so ahead of the curve. And you have told me before that if left to your own devices, you would have sat and spun the little metal plate at the end of your bed. And that's what you would have done all day long. How did your mom get you out of the bedroom, get you into the stalls with the horses, and then get you drawing horses? How did she get you to do that?
Drawing horses, I was doing in about 3rd grade, because when I was in 3rd grade, I would just draw the same horse head over and over again. And she just suggested, well, let's draw the entire horse. Let's draw its saddle, draw its stable. Okay, you have a kid that loves cars. Well, let's look at different kinds of cars. In other words, take that fixation and broaden it so it's not quite so fixated. That's what people need to be doing. You figure out how to broaden it. And then when I went away to the special boarding school, I loved riding the horses, and I still had some problems with anger. I had to turn anger to crying. That's how I got rid of anger. And they took riding away for 2 weeks after I got in a fist fight in the cafeteria. And, then we had remodeled the horse barn at our school, and they suggested to start taking care of the horses. and I started doing it and liking it. You see, people, you've got to try stuff. We've got to replace, give them a choice. You can do this art project or this. In other words, give them a choice of things to replace what you're doing. I was allowed to spin the little brass plate on my bed for an hour a day. Then we had to do something else. I could go outside and play with my kite, for example. But we're going to do something else, but always give some choices. But the choice isn't going to be in your room all day, but you do have some downtime, do stuff like that. And they found they had to give the astronauts on the space station an hour a day, which just be their alone time.
So many people are writing in so many wonderful things saying what a gift to have Temple's opinion and thank you. And a mom who has written in and said that you helped her so much that years ago you were able to be on the phone with her and that you helped to get her child to eat and that it was just a dream to be on the phone with you. So just want to acknowledge that there's so much love being poured out to you right now.
Well, I really appreciate that. And I just want to, this is a difficult time. I mean, I've had all my events are canceled for the next 2 months. Everything is canceled. My last airplane trip, last event was on March 11th. I got on a plane on the 12th. They had a faculty meeting the next day. They were going to close school. That was Friday the 13th. And we were told to get our classes online. Boom, like that.
And how are you finding the online teaching? Because they're wanting to know what you think about this online teaching and what about the kids who are at home and don't have access to online curriculum, what your thoughts are about that.
Well, then
let's start with, are you enjoying the teaching online? It's different, right?
Well, I miss the interaction. I've given my phone number to all the students. I'm begging them to talk to me. Now it's totally ruined the labs for everybody because we were kicked out so quickly that there was no way to videotape the labs. I'm not allowed to go to the experiment station. So that really is bad. Now, other parts of the class, the lectures, I had 3 of them already online, and the 3 others we put on a website that's used for the university online learning. So the lectures are there. I have a project where they have to do look up journal articles online on a subject that each student picks on animal behavior that interests them. That we can still do just fine. They're still going to do the drawing project. And then to turn it in, they're going to have to screenshot it with their phone. And then I get on the chat board every afternoon and make replies.
And so you're making it work.
Make it work.
Right.
And I had to learn how to use the stuff. I had to get my students to teach me how to use it. And it's like, boom, you got to do this.
For the parents that are home and have kiddos that are home that are on the spectrum that typically would have had an aide in the classroom and are now faced with the teacher being online and the kiddos aren't responding well to it, do you have any words of wisdom?
Well, the thing is going to be really hard on the parents. The parents are going to have to be the aide. I don't know anything else to say. Now, I'm recommending that we're going to get up. We're going to not be in jammies. We're going to get dressed for school, dressed for work. I think that applies to the whole family. And let's get some of the serious schoolwork done in the morning when you're not tired and cranky, and save the easier stuff for the afternoon. Then we have then you have an hour where you can play a video game, and then you can go walk the dog. Then we do some exercises. Maybe we get group exercises online or something, but make a new schedule the same way they do in the space station. They schedule their meals, they schedule when they have to do their experiments, but they also have scheduled downtime.
Yeah, in fact, you can pretend that you're on the space station.
Well, that's sort of like what it's like.
Yeah, it's exactly what it's like. And then for parents, they're also wanting to know if there isn't anything online that's being offered, do you have any recommendations?
Well, then I would go on some of the homeschooling websites and maybe buy some workbooks, buy some materials online. Now, one of the problems that's happening with Amazon Warehouse now is they may run out of books because they have to stock essentials. But the books are available electronically. So if you buy a Kindle or some other device like that, I'm sure that's considered essential. But no, you need to get some materials. I'd get on the homeschooling websites and I would try to find materials And
Yeah.
we're gonna have some classes. We're gonna have to have a time where we're gonna do schoolwork, whether it's
Yeah.
actually online or you're gonna do it with some materials. There's tons of free stuff online. Let me tell you how to find some really cool mathematics stuff. Use Google Images to search for mathematics stuff. You will find websites you will not find on regular Google. You want to see the cool patterns? Go to Google Images, type in protein symmetry. Let the math kids go play with that.
You and I
they'll see
talked
the
about
math
this
and
last week, and I've been having fun with it all week long. Because when I called Temple to see if she was available to do this, and she was like, "Are you near your computer? Look this up right now." And I said to you, I said, "Temple, I'm looking at these beautiful pictures. What am I looking at?" And do you remember what you said to me?
Well, you're looking at things like the mitochondria of the cell that provide energy for your body to work.
Yeah,
You're
but you
looking
said
at-
to me, you're looking at the art that is inside your body.
That's right. That's
And
right.
that got me very
It's
excited.
Very, very cool. And there's so many, now for computer programming, there's Scratch programming, there's a code.org. That's another thing. Coursera has a lot of free college classes. Now, if you want them for credit, you're gonna have to pay, but there's a lot of free stuff online that you can do where you can take college classes online, really cool college classes.
You
Take
turned me on
advantage
to
of this
Khan
stuff.
Academy. You're the
Khan
person.
Academy.
Yeah, Khan is KHAN academy.org, you guys. And Temple was the first person to tell me about that. And they have curriculum aligned information for everything from pre-K through 12. It's an incredible, and actually above that, it's an incredible place. And you're the one who told me, and I got my son on there. It changed everything. And it's free. So you can't beat that.
All this stuff I'm talking about is free.
Okay, some more questions here. Now that adult that we were trying to figure out, he said he was diagnosed at 58. How exciting is that? And that he was nonverbal until he was 5. And that was that person that we were talking to about things that could help, resources that could help. So it was an adult. Good. Another person says that they have a 5-year-old who has good vocabulary, but how can I encourage him to talk? He's simply not interested to talk. Used to talk when he was below 2 years.
Well, always make opportunities for talking. If he wants a food or he wants a toy, say, use your words and then give him time to respond. These, if the website doesn't come up right away and you're poking the mouse and stuff, and then the computer just freezes. Well, that's the way these kids are. You might have to give them 5 seconds to respond. That's a long time if you time it. But always have opportunities to use language. Okay, let's have some sit-down meals now, like we used to have in the 50s, where if I put my fingers in the mashed potatoes, mother would say, use the fork. If I reached across to grab the serving dish, mother would say, ask your sister to pass it. Give the instruction. Then you might ask him what he did what he did on his online learning, or a movie he looked at. In other words, each member of the family would tell something they did that day. I think this is one of the ways to get language going, because that's what they do at the space station. They eat together.
Absolutely. Speaking of that, Angela wants to know about relationships. I have a 17-year-old that doesn't have friends outside of school or sports. Not sure what to do. Is there a website that teens hang out on?
Well, it's friends who shared interests. I mean, I've got friends, and there are people where we do cattle stuff together, or it's animal behavior, or it's autism stuff, where it's a shared interest. Robotics, of course, when school is going, things like art, robotics, choir, all the things we can't do now. Those are things that would be a shared interest. Fixing cars. I had friends that that built equipment. Those are things that are a shared interest.
Yeah, there was a study that was done years ago about how to make kids bully proof, how to get them to be less bullied by their peers. And what they found was that if they created a club after school, and it could literally be that kid creating a club about their interest, that it attracted other people to whatever their interest was. And then they formed a pack, and they were less likely to be picked on, all of them. Well, and I sort of thought that was fascinating.
That's a good idea, because the only places I was not bullied in high school was horseback riding, model rockets, things where there was a shared interest. Now, fortunately, when I was in elementary school, I went to a very small elementary school, really small little classes. And the teacher explained to the other students that I had a disability that didn't show, like crutches or a wheelchair, and that the other kids need to be helping me. And that has a fancy name. It's called peer mediated intervention. And you can, I do have a free paper online. It's called how horses help a teen with autism to make friends and learn how to work. Type that title into Google, you can find it.
Okay. You mentioned before that you got into trouble at school because you got angry and that you learned to deal with the anger through crying. I'm always fascinated though, what made you angry? Like, why did you punch that person in
they had bullied me. They had called me names. They had bullied me. That was the reason. And I had to switch from anger to crying. And another thing with NASA, I went to a really sad thing where when they had on 60 Minutes, when the space shuttle got canceled, these NASA space scientists were crying. And that's one of the reasons why they still have their jobs, because they were throwing tools. NASA would have fired them for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's better to cry. Bunny wants to know, I just picked up my son who is 9-year-old and has ASD and is semi-verbal, his learning materials. It's a big box of materials and I have no idea or how long to work. I'm on the spectrum as well, so I need directions.
Well, some kids can, concentrate longer than others. Some kids are really hyperactive. You got to do a little bit of learning and then give them breaks. It's going to depend upon the kid. And there's others that can knuckle down and, put a bunch of work out. I think another thing that might help with the kid is let him have some choices of which things we do first, so he has some control over the environment. We're going to get the schoolwork done, but we can have some choice of when we do some of the different activities. And some kids can do a lot of work at one time. Other kids need breaks. They need sensory breaks. I think one of the worst things schools did was taking out recess. Another thing that schools did that was really bad was taking out hands-on classes. If I had not had sewing and woodworking and art, I would have hated elementary school. So let's work craft projects. And of course, here's my book on the things I used to like to do as a kid, Calling All Minds, and making things. Maybe we can work math into making things. We can think of creative ways to do things. I'm finding right now, the day that I've got graduate students right now with awful writing skills. They don't know how to sort of frame an argument for something. And the reason why they're so bad is they never had to write book reports, and they never had anybody mark up their work, and then they had to go back and correct it. And this is something that's gotten really bad in the last 5 years, and I'm not the only professor that's been complaining about this problem.
Well, and the thing is that this period of time, regardless of whether we wanted it or not, we are forced to have this opportunity where we could do all kinds of things. So maybe at school, they're not going to stop and have a break and teach sewing, but we absolutely can do that.
You can do that. You can
we absolutely
can. You can do it like a lot of older people. I'd rather just get a big slug of it done in the morning, but there may be another kid where you do a little 15 minutes of work and then you do something else and it's spread out through all the day.
Yeah.
But you need to eventually, you got to figure out some kind of a schedule where
absolutely. Now, Alexis has written in and said, because we were talking about video games before, they said a lot of video games aren't a problem. Get the kid to learn how to, they may learn how to. They may either, for videos that teach people how to play or teach them how to run massive multiplayer games. Now, Temple, I'm wondering, have you seen any of the games that are VR? Have you done the thing where you put the?
I haven't. I've done virtual reality. I haven't done it in a video game, but I've done it in just a demonstration. They
have ones that teach job skills.
Well, and
they make it fun.
Well, that's good. Some of that stuff would be good. Like maybe it's a video game of how to interact with customers in a store.
Yeah,
that's something that could be helpful. You see, there's a lot of things you can learn from video games, but
absolutely,
that's an hour a day of doing it. Okay, eye-hand coordination, some problem solving. So that's 1 hour a day of doing it, not 5 or 6 hours a day. The benefits you would get in 1 hour.
Now, Nikki has written in on Facebook and she wants to know, what coping skills can I use when our internet or cable goes out? My autistic son beats himself, attacks others till it's fixed. I've tried social stories, a box of things he enjoys to keep him busy, but it doesn't work. He even goes so far as pulling his own hair out. Please, how to help with his anxiety about cable and internet connection not working. Thanks. She says this is a major problem.
Well, one of the things first of all, let's try to work on getting him to do some other things where he's not so dependent on the internet connection. Does he have a dog? Would he like to learn how to cook? Would he like to learn how to do some hands-on thing? I'd like to try to get less dependency on the internet, that there's other things that you can do. And
absolutely.
And now there's still, if you have DVDs around, you can have some DVDs that you could play. You can probably buy a DVD player online so that you've got some movies stored. So when the cloud crashes, you could still have things to do. You see, the problem is the internet circuits are getting overloaded.
Yes, it is. I keep, keeping my fingers crossed that we get to get this live feed out. But I also want to put a plug in for those of you who are having ABA with your kiddos and you're doing that telehealth piece that Temple was talking about before, where they're coaching you. This would be sort of an ideal thing to ask for coaching on from your ABA professional to help you to set up parameters and an intervention so that you knew what to do when it was happening and you knew what to do before it was happening. I just want to throw that 2 cents in.
Well, I'd like to try to work with this kid to have less dependency on the internet.
Absolutely.
And let's start working on gradually getting him to do some other things that have nothing to do with a screen, so that screens aren't his whole entire life. And you're going to have to do that gradually and give him some choices, because so the internet is going to go down. That's going to happen.
It is going to happen. Manuel wants to know, my daughter is nonverbal and very hyperactive. She's 9 years old. What would you recommend to help her? And he says, it's a pleasure watching you both live. It's a pleasure being here with you. And I don't know about you, I got so excited about seeing Temple's Kitchen. That was a big, woohoo for me today.
I read a really, really funny thing online that some employees, has this big, huge, super important vice president boss, and he couldn't get away from looking at the guy's kitchen cabinets. Right. And I read that on a thing about, working online. They just couldn't imagine that this big vice president might even have kitchen cabinets.
Right. I'm like, Temple, there are things
people have.
Right. There are things on your refrigerator. And before this is done, I need to know what things are on your refrigerator.
Well,
it's exciting to me.
There's a bison on there, and there's a cute little puppy on there. Then there's some little magnets that were given to me of some artwork.
Well, fabulous. But now back to the nonverbal, very hyperactive 9-year-old. What would you recommend, Temple?
Well, let's try to work on things where he can, mother used to say, run the energy out of you. Okay.
And it's a girl, it's a daughter.
Exercise things, some sensory things. His mother says, run the energy out of you. So we got to try to figure out some things that he can do. I don't know if he lives in an apartment or what he lives in. But he's going to have, the other thing I'm going to ask is, what was he doing before COVID? What kind of situation was he in? You see, this is where I got to have more information, and how well was he functioning in his previous situation?
Yes, it is a girl. He mentioned that it's his daughter.
Girl,
but
okay.
One of the things we've been talking about on the show is that even for people who are in apartment buildings, I just keep remembering, Temple, back to when I was a young girl and we didn't have the internet. And a lot of times we got snowed in for days on end because I lived in upstate New York.
We play in the snow. Oh, right. We went out and played in the snows. And then I was taught turn taking, where I'd roll the bottom ball of the snowman. My sister would do the middle ball. Then I would do the head. And then we had a box of old junk, the snowman decoration box. And it just had silly things in it, like hats and scarves and things like old pill bottles. We'd use those for eyes. It was
wonderful.
Now, of course, there were no pills in those bottles, empty pill bottles.
Absolutely. Yeah. But there was also a lot of time when we were kids that we had to be stuck indoors, and we would make an obstacle course in the living room, and we would create ways and my mom would help us to create ways that we could get our yayas out. That's what we always called it. So even if you can't go outside, you can't get to a park, you don't have any place to take your kids, but you're in your apartment, turn your apartment into an obstacle course and make them run the obstacle course. Kids need exercise.
Well, we used to play horses when I was a kid, and since I was big and strong, I was always the horse. Somebody light would ride me. But that, and then we had a brown rug in our TV room. That was the corrals, and then the living room was the pasture because they had a green rug, and that takes up a lot of energy.
And that kind of play, it actually requires a lot of cognition. It helps you to work on all the different kinds of plays that there are of taking something and endowing it with other qualities, doing imaginary play, doing sociodramatic play, and it's really good for our kids. So, it's really important, especially for those hyperactive kids, to be able to have a way to move their body. Even, we were recommending the other day, rearrange your furniture, like push the furniture around, push it back to where it was. But that pushing kind of things activates heavy work. Exactly. So good for that.
Also, if you've got an OT that you could get on a teleconference, could give you some coaching, and that might be helpful.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Another question here. Good morning. Have a question. What do you do when your son doesn't want to be with another person? My son doesn't want to be with my little girl. And you were talking about if we had two astronauts that didn't like each other, how would we help them to work this out?
Well, probably be spending some time apart at opposite ends of the space station. Oh, and there's been problems where on one of the not the U.S. space station, but a Russian space station, they felt they were overworked and they turned off the communications and mission control, and which wasn't the best thing to be doing. But now some people on the spectrum have problems with the high pitched, like a baby's cry, the voice. Could that be the issue? What? Sometimes it's sensory. I get asked all the time about autistic people and animals. And what I say is there's three ways that they react to animals. Love them, scared at first, then love them. And then ones where it won't work because they never know when the dog's going to bark because you can't control the dog and then it hurts their ears. Now, other sounds that you can control, like the vacuum cleaner or maybe some other hairdryer or something like that, if the child can turn it on and control it, that can often be really helpful. Where they turn it on and off, they might get to like the vacuum cleaner, but you can't control a little sister screaming or whatever. And if it's sound sensitivity, well, then you can wear a headset then when she's around, but you can't wear a headset all the time. It'll make your ear more sensitive, but you have it with you all the time, but you want to try not to wear it. Again, give him control, but I got to find out why he doesn't like his little sister. And sometimes things like that aren't sensory based. Now, I don't know. I'd have to ask a lot more questions.
Okay. Another question, Dr. Grandin, I have a son who is 10. He loves to build cages for animals. It is all he wants to do. How can I foster this interest, but still get him to do his schoolwork?
Well, we can have a time to do his building things, and then has to be a time for doing schoolwork. We might give him some choices of the times on the schedule, but you are going to have to do some schoolwork.
Absolutely.
And the other thing I might do, if you could get the teacher on the phone or something and ask for help. I think a lot of these teachers would be available by phone, and maybe the teacher can give you some ideas.
Absolutely. Katie wants to know, have you heard about the cholesterol study at OSU that's carnitine cholesterol absorption issues, talking about regressives, mitochondrial disorders, and apraxia, and she wants to know if you know anything about that.
I would recommend you go to Google Scholar and look things up. Now, I know myself, I have to eat a certain amount of meat. There's no way I could be a vegan. My mother's the same way. We got to eat a certain amount of meat. I think there are differences in metabolism, but I would recommend doing Google Scholar search to look that stuff up. And how do you get on Google Scholar? Type Scholar into Google, click it. You'll see a link that says Google Scholar. Click on that. That will give you a new search box that takes you into the scientific literature.
Wonderful. I love this question. Temple, you are so awesome. I want to know what you were doing with your free time during COVID-19. Are you watching Netflix too? And what are you watching?
Well, I've just started watching the new Star Trek Picard show. I love it. I just love it. And but I'm not binge watching it.
Okay.
I think how about one episode a day?
Right.
And then maybe do some other show. You see, I think we need to get a more, restrained schedule here.
And so
And not
that
just
I have,
binge watch the whole thing.
right. Well, I happen to know that show is on, it's on CBS Access only. So it, and for a while, it only comes out once a week. So
But then they leave the episodes online.
yes.
Because
So if you're just starting now, you've got like what, 6-7 episodes. That
well,
you
that's
can
right.
watch.
And you can start watching those.
Yes.
And Amazon does have it. You can get it that way too.
Have you had the opportunity to meet Patrick Stewart?
Never have met Patrick Stewart, but I did have the opportunity one time to meet Leonard Nimoy.
Oh, I'll
Yeah.
bet that was super cool.
Yeah, that was.
Now I've not met, I did not have the opportunity while he was alive to meet Leonard Nimoy, but I have met Patrick Stewart. He would probably think you were the most fabulous thing
I
ever.
loved Mr. Spock, and I loved Data, because I really
Yes.
related to those characters because they're like an autistic person.
Yes.
There's a lot of subtle emotional things that I still don't pick up.
Now, are
And,
you watching? There's a lot of things on television right now, Temple, where they're featuring characters who are on the autism spectrum. Are you watching any of
The Good
those?
Doctor show? I've seen that.
Yeah.
Now the thing is, a person with autism, as they get more and more, do more and more stuff, to start to learn and learn, what gets people upset and things like that. But I still have got, I have problems because I tend to be very, very logical. And I found that looking up online, medications that could treat COVID, that greatly reduced the fear. I remember when I first found some of the drugs, I'm going, wait a minute, I'm not going to die. There are some things to treat it with.
Yeah. And that's a very healing thought. Navnet wants to know, my son does not speak and was diagnosed with autism when he was 1.8 years old. He is now 5.5 years old. What can we do to make him speak? We feel that he understands, takes us to what he wants, points fingers, murmurs some voices, kinds of words,
What was the
but
age
doesn't
again?
speak. He's 5.5 now.
Now, the thing I want to ask at 5.5, are you getting any words at all? See, this is what I want, more information. There are some kids that aren't going to learn to speak, and they remain nonverbal. And there's some really good books to read. And one of my favorites is Tito Mukapadahay, How Can I Talk If My Lips Don't Move? That's Tito Mukapadahay, How Can I Talk If My Lips Don't Move? And he's in a sensory disordered world. And then there's the sequel to The Reason I Jump. And I like the sequel. It's got something like fall down 5 times, get up 6 times. It's got a weird title like that. And he talks about not being able to control his movements. And so now we got to give him a way to communicate if he's not talking at all. And maybe we need to introduce typing. Tito and Noki both type independently, completely independently. And if we got kids that remain nonverbal, I think those 2 books are absolute must reads, written by people on the spectrum.
Yeah, everybody that we know that that is nonverbal, that wasn't speaking as a child, and then has been given a device or given a method to have functional communication, they all say the same thing. They say how important it is to give children a way to communicate.
I agree.
And that it's different. I mean, I guess there's preferences, in the ABA world, they don't necessarily recommend having sign language be the preferred modem of communicating, because so many of us don't know sign language.
That's right. I would agree with that, but some way to communicate. And there's some that can type completely independently. There are others that can use communication devices. But I can remember the frustration of not being able to communicate and just screaming. And in one of my very first book, Emergence Labeled Autistic, mother was taking me to the speech therapist, and I didn't want to wear this hat, so I chucked it out the window of the car, and she tried to grab it, and we got hit by, sideswiped by a semi-trailer. He swerved off the road to save us, because I didn't want to wear this stupid hat. You see, that is frustration with not being able to communicate. It is a huge frustration.
Absolutely. We're running out of time. I'm going to ask one last question. Temple, you are the best. I am crying watching this. How can I find my son's special interest?
Well, I need to start asking a bunch of questions. That, if maybe it's a video game, well, what's a video game about? What's his favorite toys? I don't even know his age.
Yeah.
Okay, now the other thing that's really important on interests, I got interested in cattle when I was 15, when I was introduced to them on my aunt's ranch. So what this shows is that an interest can happen by introducing different things. And this is really important on careers. And I think learning how to work's really important. But I got introduced to cattle. And then you find out you like them. Or maybe you get introduced to something, you find out you don't like it. That's important too.
Yeah.
But we need to be introducing kids to more things. I would have to ask a lot more questions. I don't know the age of him. I don't know how verbal he is. I don't know what's his favorite subject in school. I'll often ask that question. Well, maybe we can get an interest there.
Wonderful. All right. Well, and I don't know if they'll have time to write in, but I wanted, before I need to remind some people about things that are happening on the show, but before we leave, I want to ask about your mom. How is your mom doing?
Well, she's doing, and we got some groceries sent to her. She said she didn't need them, but she's done. She walks every day. She said she's got to keep walking. She's 93 years old, and she's got to keep walking, and she's doing really well.
Good. I'm so glad to hear that. For so many of us, we all look up to you, Temple, and think that you are incredible. But for a lot of us moms, we also, we try to follow in your mom's footsteps, because look at what a great job she
Mother
did.
had a very good sense of how to push me. You got to stretch these kids. You don't chuck them in the deep end of the pool, but she had stretch and give choices. Stretch just outside the comfort zone. She had a really good instinct on exactly how much to stretch me and give me choices. Like when I went to my aunt's ranch, I could stay for a week or stay all summer. Not going wasn't one of the choices. But I did have the choice that if I got too stressed out, I could come back. I got out there and I loved it. And I'm finding kids where he goes to maybe a sleepaway camp or something like that, and then he finds out he likes it. We got to get him doing things. Now we're going to have to figure out how to do things like now inside your own space station.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, you've always pushed me with my son. My son has always appreciated, you probably don't remember, but years ago, we were in a restaurant together, a barbecue restaurant, and my son was, my goodness, he was probably 11, and he was complaining about the fact that I was not letting him go to the restroom by himself and that I would take him in the women's bathroom. And you read me the riot act, and we were in the restaurant with my son, and you made me stop right there. You talked him through the whole thing, and you made me
what
sit
I ended
there.
up doing? I waited until the end of the meal.
Yes,
We had the whole meal, like for maybe 20 minutes or so. And at the end of the meal, I just casually said, okay, it's time to use the men's room.
Yes.
And he got up and he used it, and he had to ask the waiter where it was, because I could see I was facing towards where the restrooms were. You were back to them. And he went, and he successfully used the men's room.
Yes.
I didn't tell him at the end of the meal you're going to use the men's room.
No.
I just casually said, okay, it's time for you to go use it.
Yep. And you made me sit there, and you talked me through it while he was in there, and you told me he was going to be okay. And you told me, you have to stretch him, Mom. You have to let those apron strings go further, because he needs it and he's ready for it.
And it was a barbecue restaurant. It was like 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yep.
And there was nobody else would have been in that restroom. It wasn't busy. I could see the door and then see him come out.
Yeah.
And he did it.
Yep, he did. And all because you talked me through it. And I appreciate that still to this day. And he does. He's like, Temple's on my side. I get to use the men's room. All right. We are about to be out of time, but I can't tell you how much I appreciate you. And honestly, Temple, if you have more free time over the next couple of months, we're happy to have you back whenever you want.
Okay, I thought you had me back at 5 o'clock my time in Colorado.
Yes, we have you back later on today for a very specific group today that it's just a group for parents, and thrilled to have you then. But if you want to be back on Autism Live, we will make ourselves available whenever you want to do this.
I'll probably be happy to do that.
Well, wonderful. A couple of programming notes that I want to tell you guys. We are back tomorrow with Let's Talk Autism with Shannon and Nancy, and our very special guest on the show tomorrow is Danny Bowman. She is, and actually you have met her, Temple. She's a remarkable young woman in her 20s on the autism spectrum, brilliant artist, has her own animation studio, and she teaches animation to individuals on the spectrum. And she's offering a very special online class right now that's free.
Well,
she's going to tell us about that. So Wonderful. And then we've got great programming for you next week. I want to let you guys know that a week from tomorrow, we're going to have Julie Matthews from Nourishing Hope. There's another person that you know, Temple, that you've done things with Julie Matthews before. And she is getting ready to do a big summit that's online towards the end of this month that I think you're all going to want to know about, because it's about the food that we eat and how it affects us and how it affects our kiddos, and what foods we can do to keep what things we can do to keep our food supply, even in this emergency, as clean as possible so that our kids have healthy guts, which then helps them. And I know that that's something that you're very interested in as well, Temple. We all got to be healthy. And you were talking about the food supply, right?
Well, I'd say we got people out there, truck drivers, we need to be thanking them, people that work in these warehouses.
Absolutely.
Because you have the Amazon warehouse, but you take Walmart, Walmart has a warehouse, Target has a warehouse, all the grocery stores, they have these big distribution centers, huge supply chains that people have to work in to get that food into that store.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Julie's going to be talking with us a week from tomorrow. We've got great guests all next week, including Dr. Doreen Granpichet on Wednesday, here answering your questions. But we're a little bit past time. We have to let Temple go. She's got lunch plans.
Another appointment, so I'm going to have to go.
Temple, it's been such a pleasure. I'm going to talk to you later on today.
Okay, great. Wonderful to talk to you. I'm going to sign off now.
All right. Thank you so much. And I'm going to sign off too. We're going to be back tomorrow with Danny Bowman and Let's Talk Autism with Shannon and Nancy. Until then, give your kiddos a hug from me and one for you too. Bye-bye for now.
To fail, then you want see, like if I do this, that's like terrible. That's like terrible for the network because on the network and how much.
Oh, now we're going to.
Well, I just messed up the network doing that.
I was going to say, it's like the doctor who said the old joke about you go to the doctor and say, "Doctor, it hurts when I do this," and the doctor says, "Well, then don't do that."
Yeah.
Right.
The advice and opinions expressed by the host of Autism Live and her guests are meant solely as suggestion and should not be in any way construed as child-specific advice. The Center for Autism and Related Disorders advises working with a board-certified behavior analyst who has experience with autism before starting any intensive behavioral intervention. Any choices you make in determining your child's treatment are completely at your own discretion.
Good morning. It's a fabulous morning, Tuesday, and we're here with Dr. Temple Grandin, and we've already had technical difficulties. I am told that we are live right now on YouTube, but that we have not been able to go live on Facebook. So I'm asking everyone who's watching us on YouTube to go to your Facebook and tell people to come and watch us on YouTube, because we're here with Dr. Temple Grandin, and I don't know, the internet is broken. But we're still here, and Dr. Grandin is ready to answer your questions, and so you can be sending them into us on YouTube right now. We will get this reposted on Facebook later on today, but I don't know, Facebook is not my friend today, or the internet is not my friend. I'm not sure which one, but I'll tell you who I do count as a friend is Dr. Temple Grandin. She's one of my favorite people on this planet, and she is a celebrated author and a teacher and an advocate. And right before we went live, we were talking about how books, ebooks, and hardcover books, and how it might be a little bit difficult to get books, but we want you to know that it is
easy to get. Excuse me, I just did something that might make the network. Ebooks,
we were talking.
Ebooks aren't where the problem is. Ebooks work fine. Amazon's got plenty of ebooks. That's where.
But it's the hardcover that people might think is hard.
Paper, it's the physical books where there's a problem.
But
just like the internet's gotten overloaded, all the warehouse distribution supply chains are also completely overloaded.
But there are a couple of places where they can go to get your hardcover books and they won't have a big delay and there won't be a big wait. For instance, they can go to Future Horizons
Right.
To their website and they can order all of your books from right there.
Yeah,
So
all my physical books are available there, and then I have some textbooks, and one of my textbooks publishers is going to be setting up a website to distribute directly for physical books.
there you go. So don't despair. Don't despair. Don't do without books, but find different places to order them if they're being held up for you. So Temple, we're so thrilled to have you twice in the month of April. The last time we talked to you was April 2nd, World Autism Awareness Day. We just want to do it first because we got tons of questions that have already come in.
Okay.
But first, just want to check in with you. How are you doing in this period of isolation?
Well, I'm working right now on updating my Improving Animal Welfare, a Practical Approach book. I have a number of guest authors in that. It's a textbook, which makes it a little pricey since it is a textbook. And most of my guest authors are getting things done. Actually, I've had plenty of time to work on it. I might be doing an even better job of updating it. Been looking up on all kinds of articles to add to it right here. This is stuff I just looked up this morning. I print out.
I always love to know what you're researching, because the last time we had talked to you, you were researching protein symmetry, and it was some beautiful artwork. As you said, art in your body. What were you researching this morning, or is it secret?
It's not a secret. I was simply looking up problems with older dairy cows, and that sometimes they get into very bad condition. And I was trying to just get some updated data on that. Because
very cool.
The second edition came out in 2015, and for the new 20 or 21 edition, I want to try to have the newer references. It's not changing a great deal. It's just updating it. So I was just looking up new information on bruises and survey that my student did at cow-calf producers on management practices.
Very cool. I was telling you earlier that the first time I met you, the first time I interviewed you, we brought one of the people on our crew brought cows, plastic cows, and you signed this one for me. You actually signed a couple of them, and Autism Live gave some away to some really incredible people. I don't know if you know, that's how we ended up going to NASA together.
Yes.
You signed a cow for me, and I gave it to one of the flight directors at NASA, and he was like, "Is this what I think it is? Is this a cow signed by Temple Grandin?" And I said, "Yeah." And he was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you've met her." And I said, "She would love to come here. And why haven't you invited her?" And that's how that whole thing happened. We went to NASA together and toured. It was Temple, my small crew, and what was it, like 5 astronauts that were following you around all day?
That was like a super, super fun trip.
It was a great day. I have the video from it, and at some point we have to make a short film about that, about you going to NASA, because it's some pretty fabulous video. But okay, that's neither here nor there. Let's get into some questions, shall we? Because we have a lot of people voting. I just want to tell everybody, I have pages of questions that people wrote in. Can you see multiple pages, plus which we're taking questions right now on Facebook, on YouTube, on Periscope, and on Twitter. So if you are on one of those mediums and it seems that I am ignoring your question, please know that we're buried in questions, but keep them coming in. Okay, first question. I really want to know how Dr. Grandin started eating any kind of food. Did she work on sensory issues? Did she just decide to start trying different foods? My son is 11 years old, and since he was 2 years, became very selective. He says that he will eat once. He says he will eat once he went to secondary school, but he changes his mind and keep telling me that when he turns 20, he will eat then. He is a healthy boy, but really worries me that he doesn't want to eat like everybody else. So how did you, because you were selective for a while.
Well, actually, I was a good eater. The reason why I was eating the yogurt and Jell-O in the movie is when I got in my 20s, I had terrible problems with anxiety, terrible colitis attacks. And then when I went on antidepressant medication, real low doses of it, the colitis attacks actually stopped because my nervous system wasn't in such a state of stress. But there were times where the colitis attacks were so bad that everything went through me. And that's why I ate yogurt and Jell-O. And then I would gradually wean off of that. And I actually hated yogurt. I had one doctor wanted me to drink buttermilk. That's like liquid vomit. I had to chug that stuff down. Ugh. And then I would wean back gradually onto regular food, some saltine crackers. And then I'll go and do a talk, and there in the green room's a whole bunch of little Jell-O things. I just hate Jell-O. It was something I had to do because of colitis. But let's just talk about kids that are picky eaters. One way to help to get them into it is trying new things, is let them get involved with food preparation, where they can play with the food out in the kitchen. We don't play with food at the dining room table. Want to have manners there, but in the kitchen we can play with food and explore it. Sometimes that's helpful. And one of my big concerns, if a kid just eats just two really restricted things, is the old vitamin deficiency diseases. I was just looking at one of my autism newsletters, and there was some kids that got scurvy. That's vitamin C deficiency, because of being on a very, very restricted diet, and they weren't taking any vitamins. No, get food preparation. Just get them involved in that, and they get to play with it. And then they might want to taste it, and that's a simple thing to do.
Food is a very sensory experience. I love that idea. Another question. Good morning, Dr. Grandin. I have a 10-year-old son diagnosed at 5 years old, went from verbal to nonverbal. We started ABA therapy at 5 years, and he has a lot of words now dominated by a strong mouth stimulation, echoing, scripting almost 95% of the day. Because of his scripting behavior, the school hold him at ASD 1. He knows his alphabet, his numbers, some sight words. He can read short phrases, well potty trained since 2 years, very independent. I'm trying all I know. Please help me. Any strategies that can help us decrease the echoing?
Well, there's three ways basically the brain can be messed up on speech. When I was a little kid, the grown-ups talked fast. I thought grown-ups had a foreign language. That's why that was grown-up talk. And I have some auditory processing. And one thing my speech teacher did with me, she'd hold up a cup, or maybe she'd hold up a pen, and she'd say pen, and then she'd say pen, where she'd enunciate it, and she'd switch back and forth. And then I had problems with getting speech out. I personally was never echolalic, where I might recite a movie script out. But there been some success with echolalic kids. If you can take the movie script that they don't know what it means, they yak out a movie script. Why a movie script? Because when they watch that on the television, it's always said the same way. Like if I said dog, that's a Harvard accent. Dog, that's some other accent. See, it sounds like a different word, but that TV always says it exactly the same way. So that's why they'll script a commercial or a movie that they can play over and over again. But sometimes you can work some of the words from that movie into the real world. They'll start to learn that language is real. Also, a lot of kids have a lot of sensory issues. And kids that don't get functional language often live in a sensory disordered world. Now, there's two books I'd really recommend that people read, where they have a kid that does not get really good functional language. And one is Tito Mukapadahe, How Can I Talk If My Lips Don't Move? It's available online as an ebook. Okay, ebook distribution is no problem. You can get ebooks, audiobooks. That's just fine. It's physical books where there's problems. But this book, Tito Mukapadahe, he has a lot of movements he can't control, looks really severe, but he's basically got a locked-in syndrome. There's a good brain in there, and he can type independently. I have seen him. And he talks about a sensory disordered world. His mom always took him out there, but you read that book, you're really going to get some insight into what maybe your child might be experiencing. I don't want to use the word might. Another really good book is the sequel to The Reason I Jump. I can never remember the exact title because it's something like Fall Down 5 times, Get Up 9 times, but it's the sequel. And he describes things like not being able to control his movements. He was sort of like a broken robot. And these books will give you insight. These people that type completely independently, the sequel to The Reason I Jump. And that's all of this, they're available in electronic. And then, of course, I always like to promote my own book, The Way I See It, which has just come out in a new edition, available electronically from Amazon, physical book from Future Horizons.
Wonderful. So the sequel is Fall Down 7 times, Get Up 8. I can remember the 78, but I want to know, how long did it take you before you could say Tito? I can't even pronounce his last name. How long did it take you to learn that, Temple?
Well, that took a little while. And don't ask me how to spell it.
Okay,
And
we
the
won't hold you
title of
responsible.
his book is How Can I Talk If My Lips Don't Move? But if you're working with, I'm not talking about 3-year-olds here. I don't recommend these books for people with 3-year-olds. But you got an older kid, doesn't have functional language. I think these books are must reads because they're going to give you tremendous insight into what's going on.
Wonderful. Somebody wants to know, my 13-year-old son seems to avoid speaking about autism-related conversations. At one point, I felt he was depressed. Suggestions?
Well, the thing is, things interesting on how you view autism. You go out to Silicon Valley, to big tech companies that bring you the technology we're using, and they avoid the label. They don't want to be labeled, with a disability. And then I see other kids where autism becomes their entire identity. I don't think that's good either. Maybe something more in the middle might be better. For me, autism is an important part of who I am, but being a scientist and a problem solver right now, I work on a lot of different things trying to solve problems. That's that comes first for me. I think I just talked to a really interesting person. I have to keep some confidentiality. This is a person who works for a major important technological stuff, had an IQ off the charts in everything, never got labeled with autism, but then she found out she had a high IQ. She said, well, I could go places. Well, she was waiting on tables one day, and she waited on 2 people that opened up to the door into a fabulous technological career. I have to keep confidentiality, but
Yes.
she recognized, and then when the guys talked to her, they recognized her intelligence and she was invited right in. That's back door. And the thing is, she recognized that back door, but her label was high IQ. That was the only label that she had. She's a person, 50s, a bit of an older person. But you see, I did the same thing in my career. There's a scene in the HBO movie where I go up and I get the editor's card because I realized if I wrote for that magazine, that would really help my career. And she recognized the door and she went through it and she was waiting on tables. Sometimes you just don't know who you're waiting on. See, half of all good jobs are gotten through the back door anyway. All good jobs.
I believe that too. Okay, somebody wants to know, glad to see you ladies. What are the signs that a kid will reach a high functioning level? My son is 6 years old. He is functionally verbal and has a moderate level of autism. He has been receiving ABA for 3 years now.
I can't answer specifically, but let's just look at 6 years old. Okay, I'll ask you about the speech. Can he ask questions? Can he request things? Can he read? I was 8 years old and I couldn't read. And mother taught me with phonics. And I went very quickly from the 3rd grade level up to the 6th grade level of reading. But let's just look at the skills. The thing is, a person with autism or a child with autism, they blossom. I've had parents say, well, I got my kid out doing all these things, got my kid out on a boat, never thought he'd get on a boat. And they get out and do things. You just don't know. But there's a tendency to overprotect. What you want to do is stretch and say, well, would you want to go on a boat or would you want to go for a hike? Give them a choice, but get them out there doing things and they can sometimes really blossom. They can do a lot more than what you think. And,
absolutely.
And I'm a visual thinker, so I don't really relate to terms like level 1 or moderate. I'm going to go, okay, let's just look at the skills. Dress, shower, let's start with the basics. Potty. Okay, should be learning some reading skills, writing skills. Maybe he has motor issues. Well, then he can type. There's a reason why keyboards were invented. What can he do? It's when kids are really little, you just can't tell. I looked horrible when I was a real little kid, just horrible.
I want to bring up, since you brought up your mother, that your mom, Eustacia Cutler, is going to be with us on Friday.
Good.
And she's going to be answering questions and she's going to speak a little bit about a bunch of things. And so she's asked that people send their questions in early and that she wants to answer questions on a general nature. We're working out a way that she can meet with people to answer questions individually. She prefers to do it that way. So we're asking for you to send your questions in for Eustacia You can do that as soon as the show is over, because later on today, I'm going to go over some of the questions with her. But we're really excited to have your mom on Friday.
Well,
Temple.
good. That's just great. But I'm
Yeah.
gonna be, like that. It's hard. First of all, I don't have enough information to answer things absolutely specifically. But there's a tendency, and I can understand why Silicon Valley avoids the labels, to become the label. Like this lady, I just talked to her. She had high IQ. She started talking to these tech guys. Next thing, they're taking her over to the workplace, and they're hiring her.
Yeah. Yes, because
I'm pretty sure she's on the autism spectrum.
There we go.
Sure, just in talking to her, and I'm pretty sure she's autistic. I can't say for sure, but
right. I love Howie Mandel. He has a phrase. He says, let's stop talking about what somebody can't do. Let's look at what they can do. He says, let's not talk about disability. Let's talk about this ability.
Well, this is what Stephen Hawking has to say. Y'all know who Stephen Hawking is.
Yes.
Concentrate on the things. Your disability does not prevent you from doing well.
There we go. I love it.
I really like that.
I like that too. I also like different but equal, and we know who started that.
Yeah.
That would be you.
Yeah.
Wonderful friend. Okay, next question. Someone told me that fine motor is also connected to oral motor. What are your thoughts about that? They say that their son is having trouble lifting his tongue.
Well, you need to go to a specialist on that. Occupational therapist, physical therapist, yeah, you definitely need to see a specialist. I am not qualified to.
Have you ever heard of the fine motor, though, being connected to the oral motor? I've never heard that before.
Well, I would definitely go to a specialist. Now, I have my other favorite thing I do, and that's reading scientific papers. Then I might end up going deep into the literature, but I recommend you get professional advice on that.
M says, this is interesting. I'm autistic and you talk about it well. Michelle wants to say hi to you.
Oh, thank you.
Devin says, I'm also autistic with Asperger's syndrome. When I was in hospital, my mother said that I have Asperger's to the nurses, and they did not know a bit about it, which is fascinating. Okay. Next question. My son is 4, and so it's so hard to get him to focus on anything besides his routine play. Any suggestions at all for a 4-year-old who always wants to play the same thing, Temple?
Well, when I was maybe 5 or so, or 6 years old, I would just draw the same horse head over again. And mother would suggest, well, let's draw the rest of the horse's body. Now, I need to, before I can actually give you any specific advice, I need to know what he does over and over again. Because what you want to try to do is take whatever he does. Let's say it's lining up blocks. Let's just say it's that. Well, then let's turn it into a turn-taking game where we're going to take turns lining up the block. I do a block, you do a block. Let's just start out with something very simple like that to try to broaden it into a turn-taking game. And when I was that age, there was a lot of emphasis on turn-taking games done with board games, a little bit older card games. You've got to learn to wait your turn. Okay, let's say he's spinning a wheel on a toy car. Well, then we're going to share the car and take turns with it. And then hand the car back and forth. We'll take turns spinning the wheel. Then I want to broaden it out into driving the car around. And we're going to go to different places in the living room, like the bookcase or the chair leg. There's something like that. Just very simple things like that, broaden it.
Wonderful. This is a tough one. My 10-year-old nonverbal grandson started hitting himself very hard in his face, leaving bruises, hiding under a blanket, even when going out, and being very disconnected. Doctor said it's puberty. What's your thought? It's heartbreaking.
Well, you better get some professional advice on that. The other thing you've got to look at is exactly when did the behavior start? Okay, this is a basic principle in animal behavior. I don't care if it's dog behavior, horse behavior, you got some kind of a problem. People tend to overgeneralize. I want to know exactly when that started. Puberty comes on somewhat gradually. Maybe there was a traumatic event, something like that, a death in the family. I don't know. But I've got to figure out what the behavior might be related to something. Now, there's some kids that hit themselves, and I've read first-person accounts about this, and they don't even realize they're doing it in some cases. Sometimes occupational therapy, sensory stuff can help on this. But there's a big mistake in animal behavior and human behavior to overgeneralize. And people say, oh, my horse just goes berserk. Well, after questioning the person, I found out there was one specific place where a horse went berserk, and when he was tied up in the cross ties, because he'd had an accident in the cross ties. So then we stopped using cross ties. So I'm going to ask you, when does this behavior occur?
Yeah.
It isn't something, and you're going to you need to do something about this. This is serious.
I think, Temple, a lot of, in the early years when our kids are diagnosed, a lot of the stuff we hear is that people will say, well, autism, it's a lot of, they do a lot of random, strange behavior. But I know I certainly learned over the years, there's nothing random.
Not random. It's not random.
There's a reason for everything.
Well, what I did, I can remember I was allowed to do an hour after lunch of spinning a brass plate that covered up a bolt on the bed frame. And when I did these repetitive things, it was calming. That's why the kid does it. But the problem is, if you let a kid do it all day, nothing's going to go into his head. It's okay to do a little bit of stimming to calm down. That's okay. But
there you go.
Doing it all day is not okay, because you shut off the brain. I remember doing it. I remember winding up the swings, letting them twirl. It was almost like taking a drug. And so a little bit of just non-hurtful repetitive behavior, like spinning something, is fine. But then she'd get me out, and we were expected to sit down and have meals together, do games where we take turns, have table manners. If I put my finger in my drink, Mother would say, use the spoon to stir it, just manners stuff.
What was it that you loved about spinning the plate? What was it that made you feel better?
I loved watching it, because when I spun something, I'd spin it with different amounts of force. And then I could watch, well, how long would it spin? How would it wobble as it stopped spinning? And tiny little details of how it behaved.
Which is really being scientific.
Yeah, I can remember dribbling sand through my hands, and I would just study each little grain, like looking at it under a microscope. And one thing I loved doing as a child was doing sand castles where you dribble sand through your hands. I really liked doing that. And it's okay to do some of that stuff. But the problem is, if a kid does it all day,
yeah,
they're not going to learn anything else. It's like playing video games all the day. Yeah, you might get really good at playing video games, but you're not going to learn anything else.
Do you still do anything like the spinning the plate or like the sand through your fingers? That's part of your daily?
I do a lot of doodling on papers. I'll do a lot of that kind of stuff. I've got like 25 binder clips in a chain that I'll sometimes manipulate when I'm on the phone.
Love it.
They're in my upstairs office.
So Temple, we have a very special guest who's going to be on the show on Thursday. He is a young man he's on the autism spectrum. He's an actor, and he's a professional actor. He's 17 years old. He was first on Speechless. Then he played an autistic young boy on The Good Doctor. Good. And now he has a great role on the hit Netflix show Lock and Key. Okay. And he plays an autistic young man on that. He's going to be joining us on Thursday. His name is Kobe Bird. He's a big fan of yours.
Oh, great.
And,
thank you.
And so I was talking to him and his mom last night. They want to know, do you still utilize something like your cow squisher?
No, that broke about 10 years ago, and I never got around to fixing it. So then I started hugging real people. And now we're not allowed to do that now with social distancing. So
was the real people giving you the same thing that the cow squisher was giving you?
Well, I didn't need as much from the cow squisher. Now, one thing that I still have got to do is I got to do a burst of intense exercise every day. And if I don't do it, even taking a low dose of antidepressants, if you want to read about that, that's in my book, Thinking in Pictures. And it's available in ebook, easy to get ebook. And if the medication alone doesn't do it, but a burst of hard exercise. I used to do 100 sit-ups on the bed, and then my sciatic nerve was hurting me. So now I'm doing modified push-ups. Do I like exercising? No, I hate it. But to get up to 100 sit-ups, that took a long time to work up to that. I want to emphasize that. I started out doing like 3. That was 6 months to work up to that.
Wow,
and
I'm impressed.
But if I don't do that burst of hard exercise, then I have trouble with sleeping. And I found that I'd added up like how much airport walking I did. That just doesn't seem to do the same things as the burst of hard exercise.
I've been listening. You said that when you were with us on the 2nd of April, and I've been trying to add a burst of hard exercise, and I find that it's helping me too, Temple. So
Well,
you've
good.
inspired
And
me.
work up to it slowly. I don't want anybody having a
Yes.
heart attack here.
No,
So
no,
I want to
no.
emphasize
Taking it slow.
working up slowly. But there's something, and I think there's starting to be some scientific evidence about a burst of hard exercise where slow walk. I have to get myself breathing hard a bit.
Yeah. Love it. Okay, somebody's written in and said, I am autistic, but diagnosed as an adult. I am 30 now, was diagnosed 2 years ago. I know that whenever I was a child, I was reading before my fourth birthday, but did not speak until I was 6. When I did finally speak, I was speaking on the same fluency as my peers. And I believe that the reason I was able to speak so well was because my immediate family still spoke to me and would have conversation with me as if I was able to use my voice. What do you think about that, Temple?
Well, I think that's important. I think that's important. One of the things that, Soma did with Tito, and how can I talk with Soma? She took them everywhere.
Yeah.
Well, they were from India, so they go on the outdoor markets and railroad station and all kinds of places like that, noise and stuff. She took them everywhere, and we got to get these kids out doing things. Now, what do you do about the sound sensitivity? Well, I think I may have talked about that before. Give the kid control. Let the kid turn that dreaded hairdryer on and off. And then he's going to find it fun to blow things around the house with it when he can control it.
Okay. We're getting a couple of questions for your mom, which is really great. But I would sort of love to know your opinion on this. They're asking, they want to ask your mom, how do you teach hygiene? They have a daughter who's 18, high functioning autism, has to be reminded about deodorant. It bothers me that she's not mindful about daily care. Now, clearly your mom taught you manners, and she, because you are a professional, and, hygiene is a very big deal. I've heard you lecture about people presenting themselves cleanly and getting their hair taken care of. What do you think made that important to you? Was it something that your mom did, or was it something just in you?
It's something that a guy in the construction industry did. There's the scene in the movie where the boss slams down the deodorant. And they actually took two bosses in the movie and combined them. It was actually a construction boss that did that. And I wanted the job. And he basically told me I had to clean it up. It was that simple. And I wanted the job. And that's something. Now, back in the 70s, they had these gunky, awful roll-ons. Now the solid sticks, you don't even feel them. There's no excuse for not using solid stick. And I get the unscented type. No, you have to clean it up. It's just that simple.
Do you think it's better coming from somebody other than mom, or do you think it could be from anybody?
Well, the thing that made the big difference on me, it was this was a job I really wanted. And he slammed down the deodorant just like it was shown in the movie and said, "You stink, use it." Exactly what he did. I showed Mick Jackson, the director, exactly how to slam it down. And I realized I had to clean it up.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't mean that you have to become a different person. I still dress eccentric, but you just can't be a rude, filthy slob.
Do you consider the way you dress eccentric?
Well, it's a little different, but it's important to look presentable, and dirty, filthy T-shirt. That's not okay. Wear a T-shirt, but it needs to be a clean one. And
I seem to recall that there's a story about when you went to go to the Emmys. Was there discussion about what you were going to wear about that? Am I crazy?
No, I wore a shirt that was a gift from my sister. It's my top was Ralph Lauren. My bottom was Walmart. Black Walmart. One of the reasons why I wear Walmart dress pants is because they don't itch. I got to have pants that don't itch. And they make really nice dress pants and not very expensive, but I thought that was kind of funny to have Ralph Lauren on my top and Walmart on the bottom.
Was there somebody who was pressuring you to wear a ball gown or?
No, there wasn't. I wouldn't wear a ball gown. No.
I mean, in this day and age, I think everybody is allowed to dress how they want to dress.
But I was dressed up that actually was a Ralph Lauren shirt that my sister gave me, and that's the reason why I wore it. 'Cause it
You
was
looked
Ralph
great.
Lauren. Yeah.
You looked great. And when Claire won and you stood up, I think we all cried. We all were just like beside ourselves.
And then I grabbed the mic and I said, Mom, I know you're nervous, stand up. And then the boom camera came over and took a picture of her and she stood up.
There was an amazing moment. I'm sure it was an amazing moment for you guys, but it was an amazing moment for all of us, Temple, to see you in that way. It was like winning the Olympics for all of us.
It was absolutely wonderful. And one thing with that movie, they got the right team together, and Emily Gerson-Sains, she's the one who put that whole project together. And what I learned, you get the right people doing stuff, things come out good. The stuff that's the most accurate stuff in the movie is the visual thinking is shown absolutely accurately. The projects are accurate. Some of my stuff that doctor scene, and Mother hates that doctor scene, is not accurate. She actually went to a neurologist and I was recommended to get speech therapy. But what the doctor scene was typical 50s.
Right.
But the work stuff in the movie is probably the most accurate stuff. And I like the fact it shows visual thinking accurately so people can understand visual thinking.
I think it's the first time that most people got it, that they were like, oh, and I think a lot of us went, oh, I completely understand that because my brain does that to a degree. Yeah. Like I'm visual too. And I was like, oh, well, my brain does that. It just does it in a slightly different way, but I think visually too. And it made a certain amount of sense for all of us. It was a gift to the world. Well, and I think did as much.
See, Mick Jackson, the director, was a visual thinker, but because I have another big concern in education is with all the algebra requirements, we're screening out visual thinkers. We got a gigantic shortage of high-end skilled trades today. These are essential. These jobs are never going to go away. Somebody's got to fix the heating and air conditioning, do plumbing, electrical, fix cars, build things with steel. That stuff's not going to go away.
Okay, we got another question. My daughter is 11 and just diagnosed. It took a long time for professionals to believe us. Why do girls get diagnosed later?
Well, I was just reading on the autism magazines about this. Well, girls tend to be more flexible in their thinking and they just don't show it. And one of the problems with girls with autism is getting into abusive relationships. That can sometimes be a big problem.
Yeah. Any advice for how a parent might deal with that?
Well, I have a book. I'm a shameless book promoter, but I did a book.
No, please. We love your books.
I did a book with Sean Barron, and he and I kind of have two different kind of takes on some of the dating stuff. And it's called The Unwritten Social Rules from Future Horizons. And one of the little rules they've got in there is not everybody that acts like your friend necessarily is your friend.
Yeah.
And that can be a real big problem area. I can remember other girls would get me to read private stuff to them, and then I found out they were laughing about it. That was in college, and that was very difficult to deal with.
Oh, yeah, no, that would be upsetting. Since you brought it up, I'm going to ask you, but you can tell me it's none of my business and I won't be offended. But since we're talking about dating, would you be interested in talking about any experience that you have had in terms of dating?
Basically, it's not part of my life. When I was in college, I did a little tiny bit of dating with one guy, but I just saw too much abusive stuff going on. Too much drunken angriness. I never saw a marriage I could see myself in. And what I've basically done in my life is I've replaced emotional complexity with intellectual complexity. So when there's a problem, I want to go out and research treatments for COVID because I'd like to not die, for example, or go out and reach something else like book distribution or some other thing. Because one of the things I really like doing is finding practical ways to solve problems.
Yes. Yes, the first time I met you, after we were done with the interview, you were asking me questions about, did my husband and I ever get like dating time? Did we ever get to go out alone? And I was like, no, Temple, we don't have anybody to watch our son. And then you started giving me marriage advice. You started saying to me, no, you're going to have to figure this out. You're going to have to, trade with another mom. And, because you have to have time with your husband where you're not talking about your son. And I started to laugh. And you said, what are you laughing? And I said, I'm just having this wonderful moment where I'm realizing I'm getting marriage advice from Temple Grandin. And you said, I'm a problem fixer. I like to solve problems. And I've never forgotten that. I'm still happily married, probably thanks to you, Temple.
I didn't, okay. It's one of the things that Mother has talked about is having time for the siblings. Okay, my sister's a year and a half younger. And the other ones there was a big enough gap in age that I don't think there was much effect. But the one that was a year and a half younger, I was getting the attention and she wasn't getting enough attention. And that there needs to be time for the other siblings to get and do something they want to do.
Are you still close with your siblings, Temple?
Oh yeah. Yeah, but I've been calling up Katie and Izzy and talking about what's going on in New York right now. They live in Manhattan, New York.
Yes. Well, as I said before, we're having your mom on Friday and we're taking questions because later on today, I'm going to go over questions with her. So if you guys have questions for her, be writing those in after the show so we don't confuse them with these. Okay. My son has trouble when we used to go out to stores. He gets overwhelmed. How can I help him? He's 4 years old and he can read. He always wants to play with my hair while we're grocery shopping. How can I help?
Well, I think probably the grocery store's got a lot of noise. Now, one of the things with sensory oversensitivity, one thing that helps is giving the kid some control. Okay, let's start off with going to the store maybe when it's not so busy. But then on the other hand, if he starts to get overwhelmed, maybe he can have a signal. And if he gives that signal, then she'll take him out. In other words, giving him the control. See, this is the same thing as the kid doesn't like the vacuum cleaner. You let the kid turn the vacuum cleaner on. Or the kid doesn't like buzzer on the scoreboard in the gym and you go down there when nobody's there and you turn the thing on where the kid controls it. Or you can have your headphone, you got it with you, but you want to try not to wear it. In other words, but it's with you. Again, yes. That gives you control. And then gradually you'll get to where you can tolerate more and more supermarket. But because some of these things can be desensitized. I remember Mother saying in one of her talks, she said, well, I got upset about some cannons that went off at the circus, but she took me back there again anyway, because I kind of liked it. You know, you don't want to shove them into these things. And one thing she did do, we did not have noisemakers at my birthday party. That was an accommodation. But you take the dreaded thing that makes the noise. And if there's a situation where the kid can control that thing, because what it is an excessive startle response. You know, like I'll be in the airport and somebody opens one of the doors wrong and it makes that horrible noise. I flinch now, but I tolerate it. But give them some sense of control, and then I'll gradually try to do more. And then maybe if he stays in the store a certain length of time, he can buy some little thing in there. So there's then a reward for tolerating the grocery store.
Okay, this is interesting. Somebody wants to know, do you still believe that at least one of the parents of an autistic kid is autistic or has traits of autism?
Well, autism is a truly, truly continuous trait. And I see autistic traits in parents all the time. But it's a true continuous trait. You see, a brain can be more thinking or a brain can be more social emotional. What point do you slap a label on it? There's also a link genetically with intelligence and some autistic traits, because to be really social eats up a lot of processor space in the brain. So where do you allocate it? But everything I've been reading now about genetics shows truly a continuous trait. You know, there is no black and white dividing line between, okay, computer nerd and autism. In fact, the name for the same thing in a lot of cases. And then, of course, you get down where the kid remains nonverbal. Yes, that's definitely, he's definitely got a disability there.
So then, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is it that because we think of autism as being this spectrum, so do you feel like everybody is somewhere on that spectrum?
Well, probably not, because I think it's basically sort of a spectrum between them being more of a thinking brain or being more of a social brain. It's just how you allocate the resources in the brain. You got some people who super yakety-yaks probably don't have any of the traits or barely would have them.
Interesting.
It's a truly continuous trait. Because it takes social stuff takes a lot of processor power.
I've never really thought about it that way before, and that's very illuminating. How can children of any age with autism learn the benefits of having siblings?
Well, let's do activities together. We did some good activities. We used to go skating together. We go out on the hill and take turns using the sled. Again, this is teaching turn taking. I talked to one family, and every weekend they do an outing. The autistic kid liked roller skating, I think it was. Well, the siblings then going to get choice to maybe do something different on another one of the weekends. So if there's 3 kids, then he gets to pick roller skating every 3rd weekend. But we don't go roller skating every weekend. Maybe you don't like skateboarding, but then you're going to have to sit and watch it. Because you've got to take turns picking out the movies. I've talked about what to do when they're locked up in the house. Well, watch the International Space Station. Living on the International Space Station, tight quarters.
Yes.
Floor of the bathroom. It's not that fun.
You got me hooked now on there, because there's a website, you guys, where you can go and it's Life on the International Space Station, and they have videos that are just for kids, but they're great for everyone. And you got me hooked on it because you were describing for me the one where they were making the peanut butter sandwich. But they have all these different videos that you can watch, and then they have lesson plans that go with it too. But I like this idea that you had when we spoke to you last about it, this being in close quarters. It's just like being on the space station, and that they have to make parts of their day where they do different things. Like you emphasize that they have to have part of the day where they get to be alone.
They have to be alone, and they have a very big exercise requirement, like about 2 hours a day of exercise, so they don't, it's really bad for their health being weightless all the time. Over the years, they've collected some musical instruments and things. They have time to do hobbies. But one thing they have, and I've actually got sent a schedule of the astronaut schedule on the space station. They have what's called the midday meal, where everybody is going to eat together, and that's scheduled. And then they have times they got to work on their experiments. They have time where they can get on the internet. I mean, the space station is going round and round, so it's going to be going in and out of service. And they're going to know just exactly when those points are in the orbit. That's the time to do a video call real fast. Just like cell phones go in and out of service on the road, space station's going to go in and out of service as it goes around.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Somebody says, thank you for being a role model for my daughter. She stopped violin practice today to watch this. She said that she is a lot like you were when you were little. Is it ever hard for you, Temple, that you are such a role model, especially to everybody, but especially to girls on the spectrum? Do you ever feel like you have a lot to live up to?
Well, I feel it's a responsibility. I've had people ask that. I've always got to behave myself. It's a responsibility, and I've got to take that responsibility really seriously.
Absolutely. They're wanting to know what you're enjoying in your free time right now. Like, what's your favorite free time thing to do?
Well, I've watched some of the episodes of the new Jean-Luc Picard Star Trek show. Now they're just getting involved with the Borg right now. I've always been a Star Trek fan. Also love to read my science magazines and business magazines. I was reading those this morning, read a really sad story about the flower industry. Since all the weddings are canceled, they've just had to destroy all the flowers. It was the saddest thing. And I read that this morning in Business Week, and very sad.
It's so interesting how interconnected so many things are. And when you pull, a rather large thing out, like people going out in public, I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about the flower industry and those poor people who make their living, because I'm sure that their sales have just gone right through the floor.
Well, they had to chop them up and take them to the dump, is what or to the compost pile. Really, really sad. And then other things in supply chain, meat plants getting infected, warehouses getting infected. Some places do a better job of controlling it than others. And one of the things that's been a very effective method for like places where you have people grouped together on not getting sick is if you're sick, they pay you not to come to work.
Yes.
That will drastically reduce the infection rate of some of these really important things that we have in the supply chain.
Yeah, I've been watching as they've been showing that some of these meat packing plants are closing, and with the one where they said they'd had over 600 people diagnosed positive with COVID.
Since I'm in that industry, I can't mention any names. I'm not gonna mention any names, but basically I have been watching the figures on meat plants, also on all the supply chain things. I've been like looking up the figures. And what I have found is when you pay people to stay home when they're sick, that will drastically reduce the infection rate.
There you go.
In these super critical things in supply chain. And then things like the poor flour industry, which was definitely considered the saddest thing. They had to throw away their entire crop, lay their people off. Really, really sad.
Well, and of course, we're seeing that the pictures that they were showing of the farmers having to dump all their produce too.
Terrible.
And throw it under. Horrible, because there are, we know that there are going to be some shortages and people who can't are pressed.
Well, let me just explain a few things about that. Horrible. I saw the pictures of milk tankers dumping in the field. I saw that. Vegetable crops being plowed under. I've seen all of that. Okay, what happened? Let me just explain some things about supply chain. So I am in the food industry. Where the restaurants shut down, then there's a huge amount of milk that they no longer need. And a lot of that went to restaurants. And the way the supply chains work is you have giant warehouses. Okay, imagine Amazon, but it's food. It's food, all food. Big, huge, gigantic warehouse for food. I've been in it.
Yeah.
I've been in the biggest one there is that distributes to what they call food service and institutional. In other words, that goes to cafeterias, it goes to restaurants. So that supply chain is set up, and I've got a no name policy on this.
Sure, absolutely.
You'll see their trucks. They have big trucks that bring the stuff into supermarkets, bring it into restaurants. So when the restaurant business fell, okay, now this supply chain set up to bring truckloads in to the back side of restaurants of supplies. Now, in order to, now the soup kitchens were screaming for food right now at this point.
Yes.
And so they really, really needed it. So we'd have to figure out some way to get that big distribution warehouse for the food service. We need to make, like pandemic planning now. Now, unfortunately, we've learned this the hard way, so that they can then divert that to food kitchens. Now, the problem you've got with the milk is that's unpasteurized product. You can't just sell that unless you want to get brucellosis and tuberculosis. I don't think you want that. That's the reason why you pasteurize milk. And if you want to drink raw milk, you better have a dairy that's very super good biosecurity. So you can't keep those diseases out. But you see then what happened when that supply chain shut down, then the milk processing plant couldn't process the milk. See, that's the problem that happened. And so let's say we have something happen again when restaurants are shut down, then you're going to immediately have to have another supply chain where that truck, instead of going to the back ends of restaurants, is going to go to the back end of the food kitchen.
Yeah.
But the supply chains weren't set up, and so the system just jammed. There was a learning thing there. No, I thought it was horrible. I saw that. Terrible.
Yes, absolutely horrible. I don't know. Here in Los Angeles, what they did was, because we have a huge school program through LAUSD where a lot of kids get fed through the schools. And when the schools closed, what they did was they took that entire operation and began feeding anyone. That if anybody is hungry, there's 2 times a day where they can go to all these schools all over LAUSD and they can eat, which
you set up those supply chains.
Yep.
Then the big food service warehouse, gigantic warehouse, then just puts it into that supply chain.
Yeah.
You see, what happened is the thing cut off. Okay, the cows are going to still keep milking.
Yeah.
And then to figure out what we need to be doing for emergency planning now is figuring out how to divert that supply chain. But it took a while for the schools to figure out
we need you in charge of the food chain. That's what we need. I
see it. You see it. I've been in all these places. I know how these supply chains work. I've been in these big food distribution warehouses. I've been there.
Well, I remember when the whole thing happened with the nuclear power plant in Japan. And I heard an interview with you right afterwards, and you said, if an autistic person had designed that nuclear power plant, it would never have been flooded. you said you took one look at it and at the plans, and that you could tell why the water came in, and I remember thinking, why don't we should have somebody who has the way that you think on every single team so that we can see around.
Well, that's why you need the different kinds of minds. You see, what I've learned about the mathematical mind, they calculate risk. They didn't see the water filling up the basement and drowning the electric pump that cools it. And when I was young, I used to say they were stupid. It's not stupidity. The mathematical mind just doesn't see the water filling up the basement. I see the water flooding the site, the doors bust open because they're not going to be able to withstand that water pressure. And 2 seconds later, the basement's flooded and the equipment's drowned, and the generators that run it are drowned.
Yes. Well, that's why you're right. That's why we need all the different kinds of minds. And now I'm going to ask you to tell us about your book, The Autistic Brain. Okay. Do you have that one sitting there?
No, I actually don't have that one sitting there, but I could probably run and grab it real quick. Want me to do that?
No.
Okay.
We'd rather have you.
Okay.
Let's just talk about the book, because they can get it right now from Future Horizons. But what will they find in that book?
Well, actually, last time I looked, the Autistic Brain was available in the Amazon warehouse. I just checked that. But so you can get it there, I think, too. Ebooks, all your ebooks, they're all at Amazon. Audiobooks, there's no problem with ebook and audiobook supply chain. It's only physical books. But the main thing I talk about in the Autistic Brain is the different kinds of thinking. I'm a visual thinker. That was shown in the HBO movie, what's called an object visualizer, if you want the sign term, object visualizer. And then another kind of thinker is what's called the visual spatial. This is your mathematical mind. This is your pattern thinker. This is going to be a computer programmer. You're a more traditional kind of engineer. Then you have the word thinkers. Now, when I was young, I thought everybody was a visual thinker like me. Mm-hmm. Well, I've learned that that's definitely not the case. Now, the things that visual thinkers are good at are art, design, but also high-end skilled trades. When I look back at the projects I did with some of the very large meat companies, I'm going to estimate that 20%, the welders, the designers I worked with were either dyslexic, autistic, or ADHD. I know 2 people that I'm almost positive are autistic own large metal fabrication companies. Now they're retiring. They're not getting replaced. We're losing skills. We don't make elevators anymore. Check out the new hotels. Well, now the hotels are getting repurposed, to quarantine people in. But when you look at who designs different stuff in a large food factory, any food factory, you have a part of it that I'll call the clever engineering department. That's the super clever packaging machine. All the conveyorized systems. And then you have the more mathematical parts like boilers and refrigeration. Every plant I worked on, I worked for every major meat company. The visual thinkers like me, that often weren't very good students at school, made the real clever equipment. Mm-hmm. And that's a skill we're losing.
Yeah.
Okay, we were talking about warehouses. There's a lot of conveyors and stuff in warehouses, and it comes from Germany because they've kept skilled trades. Some of our top what I call the really specialized equipment in the food industry is coming out of Europe now. It used to all come out of here. And I think it goes back to schools taking out the skilled trades and the hands-on activities 20 years ago. We're paying for that now. And this is something that until COVID got on the scene, I really talked about this because we need our visual thinkers. And I just talked to a mom of a kid. Her boy had F's, horrible student. But she was a robotics coach, and he could never pass algebra, but she managed to get him into an auto repair shop and learn he's fixing trains now.
Yeah.
Okay, that's another back door. But we need these visual thinkers, and they're getting screened out of the educational system. I am very concerned. And in my book, The Autistic Brain, I give you the science for that. And since that book's been published, there's a whole lot more science on the difference between the object visualizer, if you want to look this up on Google Scholar, and the visual spatial. Those are the scientific words when I talk about the visual thinker and the math thinker. So that's the main thing in that book. And we need our visual thinkers because things like this horrible thing like dumping the milk, well, this is the sort of thing visual thinkers can help you solve that, because I actually see the supply chain.
Yeah.
Okay, the milk processing plant tanks are full, so they turn away the deliveries, then they have to dump them. Okay, so you've got to get, you've got to get the whole supply chain working. Then the schools, it took the schools a while to figure out they could be feeding centers. Now we know that. Now we can take those same trucks, and instead of delivering to restaurants, they can deliver to schools.
Yeah,
we can just reverse
exactly.
that supply chain. But the problem is there's a very high volume supply chain, and if you don't make the plans up front, no, next we need to be solving this problem.
Hey, have you ever been to my son does competitive robotics. Have you ever been to one of those robotics tournaments where the robots?
I've seen them on TV.
And sometime I got to get you to come with me to one of them. He was supposed to, his robot had, his team's robot had won, and they were supposed to go to the championship in Houston, but that was supposed to happen last week and it all got canceled. But sometime I'm going to tell you where they are so that you can go to one with us. It's so much fun.
Well, but Temple, robotics is the kind of things that can get that kid. See, when you look at the robotics, there's two parts of the robot. There's the mechanical engineering part, that's the visual thinking part.
Exactly.
And there's the programming, which is the more mathematical part. I'd work on the mechanical part of the robot.
Exactly, which is what my son does. Temple, I'm realizing we're past the hour mark. Now we are going to continue on with the show, and you're welcome to stay with us if you want to stay. There are more questions.
I can stay for another 10 minutes, and then I'm going to have to go.
Okay, great. So another question here. My son does not speak and was diagnosed with autism when he was 1.8 years. He's now 5.5 years. What can we do to make him speak? We feel that he understands, takes us to what he wants, points finger, murmurs some voices, kind words, but doesn't speak. What can be done? Please
doesn't
advise.
Speak at all.
At all.
Okay. Well, there's kids that can't speak. He's got to have a way to communication. There's the various electronic devices, picture boards, picture exchange. Some people are using sign language, but we got to give them a way to communicate. And then if a kid has any speech at all, you always want to encourage him to use his words. Let's say he wants a juice. You say, use your words, but you got to give them time to respond. These kids are like a slow internet connection. They take time to respond. And then there's some that are not going to talk. Some of these kids can just learn to type with something as simple as a text messaging program on an iPad. I think the phones are too small for kids, but you could just use a tablet computer with a text messaging and put it in airplane mode so they can't send anything. And some can just learn to type on that.
Absolutely.
And that's what Carly, there's another book written by a nonverbal named Carly's Voice. It's another book, Carly's Voice.
Carly Fleischman, yes.
Carly Fleischman. And she just learned, she types very slowly, but she types independently. That a text messaging program, that's something that costs nothing. But I would recommend a larger device than a phone.
Yeah, Carly, for those of you who don't know, Carly, when she was very young, they didn't think she even understood the alphabet. She didn't understand the concept of one as far as they were concerned. And when she was 13 years old, she took a computer from one of her caregivers. And this is like having never communicated in any way. She typed out, "My teeth hurt, please help me." So she clearly had been understanding some things and just didn't have a way to communicate. And then of course they gave her a keyboard, and she's brilliant. She's the one who interviewed Channing Tatum a while back, you guys.
That's the thing that some of these kids can learn how to type. And same thing with Tito. Now he types very fast, and then he gets up and he runs around and flaps, and then he has to rest a little bit because it takes tremendous, both Carly and Tito talk about tremendous effort is required to concentrate to do their typing.
Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about friendship. We have a lot of people writing in about friendships and relationships. Somebody says, I have a 17-year-old that doesn't have friends outside of school or sports. Not sure what to do. What advice do you have? And other people asking if you would tell a little bit about what friendships have been like for you and have meant for you in your lifetime.
Well, when I was in high school, I got a lot of bullying and teasing where I had friends who shared interests. And they were horses, model rockets, and electronics. And to get friends outside of school, let's get involved in something where there's a shared interest. One innovative teacher started a Star Wars club in her school. and for the autistic kid. Friends through shared interests. Find stuff that you like to do together with other people. You know, a lot of my friends, they're in the autism field, they're in animal behavior, they were construction people. We used to love to just sit around and talk about how to build stuff. We also like to talk about how stupid the suits were too.
So similar interests.
Yeah, similar interests.
Wonderful. I think we talked about this last time, that there was a great study years ago that came out of Santa Barbara talking about bullying, and that that when you have friends, you're more bully proof, and that one thing that a parent can do is facilitate a club at your child's school that's something that they're interested in. So if they're interested in a particular video game, that make a club about that. And or if they're, and that then they make friends. I also, I don't know if you know the Peers program, Temple. There's a great program out of UCLA that's called the Peers program. And it's simultaneous tracks where the parents are taking a track on how to support their kid being friends and social, so that it helps them to realize when they're making a mistake. And then the kids are taking a track at the same time. And it's really brilliant. I absolutely love it. And they're offering right now to do that online with you and with your kiddos. So that's at UCLA. So check that out. Temple, can you tell me about equine therapy and autism? This is Carrie asking.
Well, there's some individuals that really respond well to equine therapy. And I find that how does autistic kids respond to animals, there's 3 different ways. Love them, a little scared at first, then love them, and then maybe not appropriate. And that's usually sensory. You can't control when a horse might whinny, for example, where I can control maybe when a vacuum cleaner's turned on. But there's parents that have said, my kid did their first words on a horse. Now I realize that's just anecdotal data, but I've probably heard that 7 or 8 or 9 times now. And one of the things we need to figure out is what subgroup responds that way. In the horse, you have balancing and you have rhythm. And those are 2 activities that stimulate the cerebellum, which is involved with timing stuff throughout the brain. There's a lot still not understood about the cerebellum. And that may have something to do with it. But for some kids, it's just the best thing you can do. But again, one size doesn't fit everybody. And right now they're building a new equine center. They did break ground on it recently. One of the things I'd like to find out is what kind of a subgroup responds that super well where you're getting that space. I've heard that anecdotally enough times, you can't just poo-poo that off. Something's happening there, and we need to find out what kind of kid that works with.
Well, there's something about animals. I know you're a big animal lover. That's been the large portion of your life has been devoted towards animals. But I feel like it's similar to how I feel about the autism community. Animals don't lie.
No,
they're just exactly who they are, and they tell the truth 100% of the time, which is what I feel about individuals that I've met on the autism spectrum.
Well, and I've talked to one mom of an autistic kid. She says, my autistic son, he was nonverbal. She says he's best buds with a dog. I don't know. They're just like on the same wavelength. You see, that has nothing to do with speech. Well, you see, an animal's world is not verbal. And when you look at some of the research now, people are still fighting over animal consciousness. I've been following some of that literature. And I read a paper that an engineer wrote. They don't deny animals' consciousness. But then you write something from the psych department, well, highly verbal. I start looking at author affiliations. And I am finding that papers written in highly verbal fields don't have a hard time believing that animals are conscious the same way we are. And I think it has to do with verbal. This is actually being debated right now.
I know.
I just downloaded a paper just the other night that an engineer had written, and he says, oh, dogs are conscious. But I think it gets down to how big of a pedestal you put verbal thinking on. And I've discussed this as a visual thinker, but I don't think you have to be a verbal thinker to be conscious. And to me, just looking at some dogs yesterday, to say that this red dog is not conscious is just ridiculous. And I think it gets down to how verbal the person is, because this is being seriously discussed right now in scientific literature.
I know, and it baffles me. I don't understand how an intelligent person who has been around dogs or horses or cattle can think that they don't think. or that they don't.
See, this is where I'm a total visual thinker, but you're taking somebody who's super, super verbal. And I've talked to some where they don't have any visual thought at all. Maybe they have a hard time imagining a dog is conscious because a dog lives in a sensory-based world, not a verbal world.
Yeah, but
that is being seriously discussed now.
I know. I don't get it. I don't get it at all.
Scientific journals.
I know. I don't understand it. Okay. Everybody's saying just how cool it is to have you here on the show. And they say, I love The Good Doctor. One person is writing, wants you to know that it's going to be 15 years in September that they were diagnosed with Asperger's at the age of 24. They want to know, have you seen the show, The Good Doctor?
Oh, yes, I have. Yeah. Yes, I did.
And what, do you like it?
Well, I think in some things he could maybe learn a little more quickly. I mean, I learned I couldn't call people stupid at a project meeting after I got some counseling from plant engineer and some other people.
Yeah. I had mentioned that on Thursday, we're having Kobe Bird on the show. He's that 17-year-old actor. He was on The Good Doctor. And he's now on a show on Netflix. It's a hit show called Lock and Key. Temple, have you seen that show yet?
I have not seen that show.
I got to tell you, I think, because we like a lot of the same things. I like Picard. I like Star Trek. I got to tell you, I think that you will like this. It's a very fun show. It's called Lock and Key.
I'm gonna have to look that up.
And Kobe plays the character of Rufus on it. And it's based on graphic novels that were written by the son of Stephen King. Did you ever like any of the Stephen King stuff?
Yeah, I've read a lot of Stephen King stuff. Yeah.
Now, sometimes that's too much for me, but this is written by his son and has a huge following, but I think that you will super enjoy it. And I would love to hear your opinion of that later on.
Well, I have to get the show up. And okay, you have another question there, quick?
Okay, what are your thoughts on authentic, and this goes right along with it, authentic representation in entertainment? So when you see someone on in a show, let's say on Picard, and they're playing somebody who's deaf, do you feel like that should be first considered someone who is actually deaf playing that role? And when you see characters on screen playing autism, like for instance, Dustin Hoffman in Rain Man, he played a character and he was acting. He was playing somebody who was on the spectrum. When Claire Danes played you, she was not an autistic actor. How do you feel about people who are on the spectrum playing people who are on the spectrum?
Well, I'd like to see people on the spectrum play in shows, but I'm not going to, I'm more in the middle of the road on a lot of these issues. And Claire Danes, I thought she did a great job. She like channeled me. She became me. And I've actually counseled Dustin Hoffmann. He looked at Joe Sullivan to see what autism looks like. And I talked to him about the sensory issues and the anxiety issues. And I remember I said, Dustin, imagine how anxious you were when you went to your first big audition. Now just imagine if you had those kind of nerves all the time for no reason. This was stuff that I told him. And yes, I'd like to see people that have a specific diagnosis or whatever, be in these shows. But on the other hand, I'm not going to say never do a Claire Danes or a Dustin Hoffman. I'm going to be more middle of the road.
Well, I'm with you right there because I want to see those individuals get the first opportunity. I want to see them have the opportunity for the employment and all of that and authentic representation. But I also want to leave room for someone who's on the spectrum to be able to play someone who's not on the spectrum. And I think once we say, oh, if it's the characters on the spectrum, it has to be played by somebody on the spectrum, then we're also going to be saying that people who a character is not on the spectrum cannot be played by someone on the spectrum. And I never want to see that happen.
Well, the other problem you got with the movie industry is they want to put a star in the leading role.
Yeah, well,
that's something they're going to want to do. So it's going to be a lot easier to bring them into a supporting role.
Yes,
the movie industry wants to put a star in the leading roles. Now, there's some situations where they put a non-star in, but no, I'm going to be more flexible. I sort of like the same thing we talk about, being in a regular classroom or a special school. I want to see kids as much as possible in a regular classroom. I will tell you something I don't want to see. I don't want to see a 12-year-old fully verbal that ought to be maybe in a gifted program in a class with people that don't talk and have problems dressing. Yeah, that's not okay because that kid's not going to go anywhere. But I want to do inclusion just as much as we practically can do it.
Yes.
But then I don't want something, see, I visualize things I don't want. He's sitting in the back of the regular classroom, just doing stems and not learning anything. That's no, but you see, I see specific examples of scenarios that I would consider not acceptable.
Yeah. Well, Temple, I've kept you way longer than I said that I was going to keep you. And I know that you've got other things to do today, but can I just tell you how much we appreciate you and how much we adore you and how much we really, how meaningful it is to get to spend this time with you. It's just so wonderful.
Really good to be here. And thank you so much.
All right. And let's go to a robotics tournament. Let's go back to Houston to a robotics tournament.
I think
and we'll see NASA again.
I'd like to do that. Okay, great.
All right.
I think I'm going to keep the meeting now. Okay. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye, Temple.
Bye.
I'm going to stay here with you guys. Bye-bye, Temple.
All right.
Bye-bye. I'm going to stay here with you guys. And isn't she incredible? You guys can still be writing in questions for her mom. I got to go over a couple of things with you guys. And then we want to give a shout out to a really good friend of ours who had something really remarkable happen in the last couple of days. But I want to start by talking about the fact that tomorrow on the show, we have Dr. Doreen Grant-Pichet, and she will be answering your questions live. And so you can be writing those questions in during that show or during now, whatever you'd like to do. But then on Thursday, we're going to have Kobe Bird here, and he's the young actor that I've been telling you guys about. We first had Kobe on the show Autism Live when he was an actor, and he was doing a project with the Miracle Project. And he came on, and I remember just being so, I fell in love with him. And I hadn't met his wonderful mother yet, but I just thought that he was the cat's pajamas, you know what I'm saying? And he was funny, and he was fabulous. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to look up something at the same time. But then Kobe, we had him back on the show because he did something called, I think it's called Broadway Dreams. And he was one of a very few number of actors across the country who were chosen to go to New York to be in a showcase in New York. And so he came back on the show to talk about that. And by that point, I'd become friends with his mom, and he had become friends with my son, and he's such a good friend. And then, it was like, look at Kobe. He's already going to be doing something in New York City. And then it was like, we snapped our fingers. I know it wasn't like this for him at all. It was a lot of hard work, but he had a role on Speechless. Then he was given a bigger role on The Good Doctor. And now he is this wonderful Rufus on Lock and Key. If you guys haven't seen Lock and Key, you need to go and watch it because there will be spoiler alerts. And I don't want to be spoiling it for anybody. So go and watch you some Lock and Key. Now, if you watch the show compulsively, you know that we did this series on card heroes, and we were talking to one of our card heroes, and we were asking, what do you do to de-stress? And she said, I watch Netflix. And I said, okay, I'm just curious, what are you watching on Netflix? She goes, oh, it's a show, Lock and Key. It's so good. And my head exploded, and I was like, no, isn't it the best thing? And did you know the Kobe Bird? And, he's been on Autism Live before. We love him. And that was why I was like, oh, we got to have Kobe on to talk about this. So we're going to talk about all of that and ever so much more with Kobe on Thursday. And then on Friday, it's Let's Talk Autism with Shannon and Nancy, and we're having Eustacia Cutler. So that is Temple Grandin's mom, and you can be asking questions of her, but I got to have the questions today because a little bit later on this afternoon, I'm going to be going over the questions with her, and we're only going to pick a handful of questions because we're working on something bigger for you. Yes, I said it. We're working on something bigger because she would like to answer all the questions you guys have. It's just that we can't do that in a very short period of time. So all those things, but we want to give a big shout out this morning to the fabulous Christina Adams. She has been a semi-regular on the show. In fact, we feature a segment with her that is called Autism and Beyond. And Christina came into my life first because I read her book. Her first book was called A Real Boy, and it was a real game changer for me. It spurred me to do a lot of what we did with our son. And I carried that book with me everywhere. I had to go buy several more copies of it because first I wanted to keep the war-torn copy that was given to me, by the way, by Logan Shepard's mother. Let's give a shout out to Logan as well. And if you haven't watched his newest video, you should go watch Logan Shepherd's. But Logan's mom gave me her copy of A Real Boy, and it became my everything, right? I never went anywhere without it. And I had to buy several more copies because I kept giving them every time I would meet an autism mom. That would be my gift to her, right? Because that's what Crystal did for me. Well, then we started having Christina on the show, and having her talk, in one of the subjects that she's talked about a lot over the last few years is camel milk. She got very involved in camel milk for her son on the autism spectrum. And we kept saying, when are you going to write the book? When are you going to write the book? Finally, she wrote Camel Crazy, A Quest for Miracles in the Mysterious World of Camels. And that is out right now. It is an amazing book that you need to buy on Amazon or wherever you get your books. And recently, her book won an incredible award. It won the Nautilus Book Award. And so we just want to give a big shout out to her for that. It is tearing it up in across the world because it's very popular in many different places. So the Nautilus Book Awards involve highly esteemed authors and publishers from across the USA, from over 20 nations around the world. This year's achievement is more notable due to the record number of entries and diversity of high quality books. The organization states that it's truly encouraged by the new perspectives these books present, with which to co-create a better future individually and collectively. And so it is one of the winners of a Nautilus Award book. So congratulations, Christina Adams. And we just want to do a big shout out, Camel Crazy. And the subtitle of the book is A Quest for Miracles in the Mysterious World of Camels. And congratulations to Christina. There is the book right there. I've always loved camels. I don't know what that's about, but from the early age, I just thought camels were really awesome. I know they spit, but how can you not love the face of this camel? How could you not? So definitely check out this book. It's a great read, and we love Christina. And honestly, it's a really cool thing. Okay, I'm checking time because we're like close to out of time. Traven, what do you think? We were going to do the jargon at the end of the show. We've got 5 minutes. Should we go ahead and go for the jargon of the day? Because this is what we usually do at the start of the show, but we didn't want to have you have to wait through jargon, and Temple needed to go early. So, okay, let's go for it. So, do something, jargon of the day, where we take on one phrase, one acronym, and we try to take on what it means. We give you the actual definition, then we give you a working definition after we make fun of the actual definition. So are you going to put it up on the screen for us here, Traven? So our term for today is functional pretend play. And I don't know, like the first time I heard that, I was like, functional pretend play. It sounds like you're trying to take play and make it boring, right? And you might see that there is the potential for that, right? But let's take a look at what our actual definition for functional pretend play is. Do you remember when we used to have toy stores? Because I'm going to talk about toy stores here in a second. I can't even talk anymore. I'm so excited. Functional pretend play. It's using lifelike objects in a purely functional, socially conventional way to imitate or act out common action sequences, right? Yawn. How can we make play as boring as possible, right? But let's go on to our working definition here to see if we can get a better hold on this. So functional pretend play is playing with toys that are lifelike in a lifelike way. So remember when we used to have toy stores, I can't talk anymore, you guys, toy stores. And there were just aisles and aisles and aisles, and each aisle had a theme, right? There was the doll aisle, and then there was the Lego aisle, right? But there was that one aisle that I never found particularly fascinating, that it always kind of made me go, what's that aisle about? Where they would have the toy vacuum cleaners. And I remember going, why would anyone want to get a child a toy vacuum cleaner? It's like vacuuming is my least favorite thing in life. Why would I want to get a child a toy to play vacuum? It was because I wasn't in the know. I wasn't in the know that part of what, and we want to do this with all children, but especially our kiddos on the autism spectrum who need a little bit more help sometimes connecting one thing with another thing, right? And play is supposed to be the place that we can all fail and have it cost nothing, right? So we want kiddos to be thinking about what they're doing and what other people are doing, right? We want them to be able to perspective take. We want them to take on other roles. And the beginning of that is when we do functional pretend play. So when you get a kiddo a fake cash register, right, that looks like a cash register, but it's all plastic and you push the buttons and it goes ding, right? But it's not a big, expensive, heavy cash register, right? We now have a place for them to play and to fail and have it cost nothing. So we do want to have kids learn through example. So, dad is vacuuming. We want for, the child to have a play vacuum cleaner and to be able to vacuum right along next to dad. We get I love now the Melissa and Doug, they have all these food boxes that, there used to be those like horrible plastic food things, but I love the Melissa and Doug stuff because it has food and it comes with a plastic, well, it's a wooden play knife and you can slice open the orange and then you can Velcro it back together and slice it open again. These are all great skills that we want our children to be working on. And we want for them to want to be able to imitate things that other people are doing. There is no better toy for our young developing children than something from that functional pretend play aisle, because we're going to take all the things that we do, like eating lunch, and we have the plastic or the wooden bread with the wooden, we featured some in our toy guide that are really good fabric, corduroy fabric. But and then you pretend to I'm eating, and that begins to teach a different kind of rule-oriented play for our children, helps with flexibility in their brains. So functional pretend play toys. We don't have that aisle in the store anymore, but you can still find them online. They're great, great toys and help with a whole lot of things. All right, we are just about to be out of time, but again, wasn't this a great show? I must say, I just so love getting to chat with Temple, and I love for you guys to get to see her live. Is there anything better than that? Don't forget, tomorrow, Ask Dr. Doreen with Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh. Get your questions answered. Thursday, Kobe Bird, wonderful, brilliant actor. And I'll tell you, you haven't even seen him sing. That boy is some talented sing, I tell you. So he's going to be with us from Lock and Key on Thursday. And then on Friday, Eustacia Cutler. And she is Temple Grandin's mom, and she's going to be answering a few of your questions. But she's going to be talking about the 4 things that we all need to know, that we all need to be teaching the people that we love on the autism spectrum and helping to support them with. She's also going to talk about the origins of the social aspect of autism. You're not going to want to miss it. And she's going to answer some questions, and we're going to tell you about how she wants to answer more of your questions. But write in questions for me right now, because those are the questions that we're going to pick from for Friday. And let me just say that next week is equally off the chain. Just off the chain, y'all. So we're going to finish April strong. And then we will continue on in May, because autism is not just 1 month out of the year, right? All right. I appreciate you all for being here with me and the excitement of all of this. And we will be back tomorrow. Until then, give your kiddos a hug from me and one for you too. Bye-bye for now.